Good afternoon, everybody. Please be seated. Routine proceedings, introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister for Education and Early Childhood Learning, that Bill number 36, the Manitoba Hydro Amendment and Public Utilities Board Amendment Act, be now read a first time.
It has been moved by the Honourable Minister of Finance, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Learning, that Bill number 36, the Manitoba Hydro Amendment and Public Utilities Board Amendment Act, be now read a first time. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, Bill 36 is about ensuring the long-term sustainability of hydro, which is currently facing levels of debt that exceed any public utility in Canada after massive cost overruns at kiosk and bi-pole transmission lines by a previous government that added billions of dollars of debt. The bill establishes an integrated resource plan, debt equity targets over time to bring hydro to a more sustainable position. It also protects ratepayers by setting 3-year rate periods and setting a cap on any rate increases. The PUB itself and its roles are strengthened. They get a budget and a role to expand and review and make recommendations on future hydro construction proposals to ensure the interests of the public and ratepayers are protected. The 4 pillars of hydro are low rates, economic development, carbon-free electricity, and a stable foundation. Madam Speaker, that foundation was threatened, but we will protect it.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. The Honourable Member for the Pas-Kamisak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move, seconded by the member for St. John, that Bill 219, the Employment Standards Code Amendment Act, leave for miscarriage or stillbirth, be now read for the first time.
It has been moved by the Honourable Member for the Pas-Kamisak, seconded by the Honourable Member for St. John's, that Bill number 219, the Employment Standards Code Amendment Act, leave for miscarriage or stillbirth, be now read a first time. The Honourable Member for the Pas-Kamisak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to introduce Bill 219, the Employment Standards Code Amendment Act, leave for miscarriage or stillbirth. The unexpected loss can be emotionally trying on expected and new parents. This bill would allow parents to take up to 3 days of paid leave following a miscarriage or stillbirth. Currently, Manitobans who experience a miscarriage or stillbirth have to cut into their sick leave, lose part of their paycheck, or risk their jobs just to take time off to heal. I hope this Assembly will follow the lead of these other jurisdictions and unanimously support this bill. Egwuson.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Committee reports. The Honourable Member for Brandon East.
Madam Speaker, I wish to present the third report of the Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development.
Your Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development presents the
Dispense. The Honourable Member for Brandon East.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Riding Mountain, that the report of the committee be received.
It has been moved by the Honourable Member for Brandon East, seconded by the Honourable Member for Riding Mountain, that the report of the committee be received. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Tabling of reports, ministerial statements. the Honourable Minister of Sport, Culture and Heritage, and I would indicate that the required 90 minutes notice prior to routine proceedings was provided in accordance with our Rule 26(2). Would the Honourable Minister please proceed with his statement?
Madam Speaker, today I'm honoured to join the Bangladesh community in Manitoba and around the world in recognizing and celebrating the 51st anniversary of Bangladesh's independence on March 26th. Manitoba is proud home of a large and vibrant Bangladesh community, which has significantly contributed to our province's rich and diverse multicultural fabric. Canada was one of the first countries to officially recognize the independent state of the People's Republic of Bangladesh following the war in 1971. Recently, on February 14th, 2022, Canada and Bangladesh were proud to mark the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between our two nations. I also want to note the UNESCO declared February 21st as the day to promote the preservation and protection of all languages used by people of all over the world and Bangladesh, and it holds a strong connection to this day. With a passion and persistence for the local Bangladeshi community, a beautiful plaza has been built in Winnipeg, commemorating the importance of all mother languages. On this anniversary, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Bangladeshi Manitobans for their dedication to preserving their culture and traditions while helping to build a brighter future for our province. On behalf of Manitobans, to everyone celebrating here at home and around the world, happy Bangladesh Independence Day. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Burrows.
Dhanyabad, Madam Speaker. Today, the Manitoba NDP joins Bangladeshis and Bangladeshi Canadians across this province in celebrating Bangladeshi Independence Day, which is on March 26th. After a war of independence, Bangladesh became a nation 51 years ago. The nation is an upstanding member of the international community, and its impact can be felt around the world, including here in Manitoba, where many Bangladeshis currently live. One major group of Bangladeshis in Manitoba are Bangladeshi post-secondary students. Like all international students, these Bangladeshis should be seen by all of us as valuable members of our Manitoban community. We appreciate how they support our economy, offer their insights into our classrooms, and enrich our cultural landscape. Unfortunately, the PC government has hiked their tuition and canceled international health insurance coverage. It's the wrong approach. But, Madam Speaker, newcomers from Bangladesh persevere. The Manitoba NDP commends all Bangladeshi organizations in this province working for the advancement of their people and culture here in Manitoba, including the Canada-Bangladesh Association of Manitoba, the University of Winnipeg Bangladeshi Students Association, and the University of Manitoba Bangladeshi Students Association.
The member's time has expired. The honourable member's time has expired. The honourable member for Tyndall Park.
Madam Speaker, I seek leave to speak in response to the ministerial statement.
Does the member have leave to respond to the ministerial statement? Leave has been granted. The honourable member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm glad to rise today to speak to Bangladesh Independence Day. The Bangladesh community here in Manitoba has been phenomenal to work with. I know I've been to quite a few events over the years, one most recently with the minister who brought forward this statement, where we had the opportunity to learn more about building up trade relationships with Bangladesh. Madam Speaker, it is important to provide a little bit of background on the independence of Bangladesh and how the partition of India back in August of 1947 was when Pakistan gained independence from Britain and therefore became separated from India. Back at this time, Bangladesh was referred to as East Bengal and then East Pakistan, and it was in 1970, after their general elections, Pakistani military ruler refused to hand over power to the major winning party, Awami League, leader Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and after that, East Pakistan began demanding independence. During this time, Madam Speaker, the government was arresting Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Army personnel, and on March 25th, 1971, Operation Searchlight was declared by the Pakistan Army, and this created a military operation that was essentially Bengali genocide, leading to approximately 3 million Bengalis being killed during the Liberation War.
The member's time has expired. The member has requested leave to complete her statement. Is there leave? Leave has been granted. The honourable member for Tyndall Park.
It was the following morning, March 26th, that the independence of East Pakistan from West Pakistan was declared by Major Zia, who later on became president and prominent leader in 1979. Madam Speaker, independence didn't just automatically begin here. Unfortunately, for 9 months to follow, there was a war raging between both regions, where ultimately many more people died. This war became known as the Bangladesh War of Independence and finally came to an end on December 16, 1971. Madam Speaker, knowing this history is why we recognize and celebrate the independence of Bangladesh. It is why in different parts of the world there are celebrations demonstrated through parades, fairs, and many different festivities. People can also celebrate from the comforts of their own homes by streaming events and posting on social media. With those few words, I want to thank the Minister for bringing forward this statement. Thank you.
Member statements. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Madam Speaker, I rise today on World Water Day to honor a constituent who has steadfastly brought attention to the health of our Manitoba lakes. Robert T. Christensen is a lifelong resident in my constituency of Interlake Gimli. His family has lived on the shores and fished Lake Winnipeg since 1890, over 130 years, Madam Speaker. Robert T. has been a commercial fisher for over 70 years and passed along the family business to his son and 2 grandsons. He also served with the Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary for 41 years. Robert T. has spent his life on Lake Winnipeg and the lake that he loves and respects. He has frequently said, "Lake Winnipeg is the jewel of Manitoba, let's look after it." This passion for the lake has led him to become a strong and vocal advocate over the years, tirelessly engaging Manitobans to do their part to clean up the pollution that goes into our waterways. He has made it his personal mission to increase public awareness and of the ongoing algae and zebra mussel issues. Robert T. led the implementation of the Canadian Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries and has a distinguished record of service to a variety of community organizations. Robert T. and his family continue to bring attention to our lakes and economy through a television show that showcases commercial ice fishing in Manitoba. Ice Vikings has been broadcast in 44 countries around the world. Madam Speaker, I commend Robert T. for his lifetime contribution to ensure the ongoing health of Manitoba lakes and the industries those lakes support. I would encourage all Manitobans to follow the advice of Mr. Christensen in helping preserve our lakes for generations to come.
The Honourable Member for the Pas-Camissac.
Kinanas Kumitin, Madam Speaker. It is my great pleasure today to highlight the accomplishments of entrepreneur Amy Jackson from Opaskwayak Cree Nation. While pursuing a master's degree in Native Studies at the University of Manitoba last year, Amy, like so many others, found herself increasingly isolated and depressed while the COVID pandemic was raging. As a way to cope, she began to design stickers through an app on her computer, with a simple goal of balancing out the many depressing things in this world with humor and humanity. Soon after, her business, Native Love Notes, was born. What started as an outlet for Amy turned into a business with an international following and a bricks and mortar store in the works. The company's merchandise includes not only stickers, but also stationery, buttons, jewelry, phone accessories, prints, clothing, and homewares. The goods are plastered with phrases such as "ever sick," "live, laugh, skoden," and phrases such as "go smudge yourself." But other designs tackle much more serious issues. They denounce racism, the Indian Act, the colonizer mindset, or like the sticker that says, "intergenerational trauma ends with me." They show a desire to make the world a better place. By now, Native Love Notes has sent merchandise to most European countries, Australia, New Zealand, South America, and of course, all across North America, and even Hawaii and the Polynesian Islands. Amy and her 4 staff members are looking forward to opening a Native Love Note store on May 7th at 1116 Portage Avenue. Despite the success, Amy has no doubt she'll return to university to finish her master's, then a doctorate in history. Her mom always told her that she was the most determined person she ever met. So Amy says, why not determined to do it all? Please join me in congratulating Amy for her accomplishments and to wish her all the best in all of her future endeavors. Egwasam.
The honourable member for Swan River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to congratulate the hard-working committee and volunteers who worked so hard to make this year's 75th Annual Trappers Festival and Championship Sled Dog races in the Paw such a success. And I want to focus on recognizing an individual who has truly earned the name of King Trapper, John Hendrickson. This year I had the opportunity to join 7 of my colleagues to this great festival. John began his quest in 1993, entering the Junior King Trapper event, where he went on to win 2 junior titles and over the years, 11 Senior King Trapper titles. John displayed his talents in participating in 21 out of 22 events like pole climbing, moose calling, axe throwing, flower packing, and tea boiling, to name a few. His interest in King Trapper was generated in school, where they ran many events. John said as a child, his role model was a gentleman named Walter Cashel, and he wanted to follow his footsteps as King Trapper. In 2006, John won his first King Trapper title. He also attributes his success to Grandpa Mike, who always took him fishing and exploring the outdoors. John said his fellow competitors were like a family and encouraged each other, and that was the spirit of the competition. Working hard at events that are difficult, like pole climbing and the grueling 9-mile snowshoe race, is key to success, as this is where titles are won or lost. John also came second this year at the Cross Lake Iron Trappers event. Last year, John took a leave of absence as he was busy pursuing his career in the Bachelor of Nursing program at UCN. When I asked John about his future aspirations, his reply was to graduate from my chosen career where I can help people and to work in the off-season getting ready for the 2023 King Trapper event. This builds character and is a celebration of coming together to celebrate tradition and heritage, and I'm proud to be a part of. Congratulations, John. Good luck in 2023, and we'll be cheering you on.
The honourable member for Concordia.
All Manitobans have been shocked and saddened by the images and stories coming out of Ukraine over the last 4 weeks. The devastation is almost incomprehensible, and our hearts go out to the people suffering there. For the tens of thousands of Mennonites in our province who trace their heritage back to Ukraine, this horror feels especially real. While the conflict has left many feeling powerless, organizations like the Mennonite Central Committee have continued to work to support those in need. For over 100 years, the MCC has been on the ground providing support for the people of Ukraine directly. Although the current conflict has forced MCC staff out, many partner organizations remain, helping internally displaced people even as they themselves flee the violence. Simple but important local relief efforts fill in the gaps and complement larger relief efforts, including providing food, distributing clothing and blankets, and buying medicine to support those who are unable to flee. Local churches are offering housing and sanctuary, and the Mennonite Family Center continues to provide programs for seniors and children living with special needs in Zaporozhye, which finds itself now on the front lines of the conflict. Here in Manitoba, the MCC Thrift Shop in Portage held a fundraiser that raised thousands to assist. In Steinbach, the Mennonite Heritage Village held a candlelight vigil to show solidarity and peace. And relief kits continue to be prepared locally, and money collected by MCC in Manitoba is still being able to be delivered to those on the ground. While the work MCC is doing currently is emergency-based relief, they've begun to think about ways to support Ukraine long-term, including psychosocial and trauma support, temporary and emergency housing, and rebuilding projects. MCC also wants to remind us that this is just one of many conflicts in our world, whether it be in Ethiopia, DR Congo, or Colombia, and just one of the many places that MCC is working to support people impacted by conflict. In the shadow of a war that involves world powers, the work of the Mennonite community is relatively modest. But for Mennonites from Manitoba, it is one small but important way that we can all work for peace. Slava Ukraine.
The honourable member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tyndall Park continues to grow in so many ways, one of which is by having our very own community market. This market is organized by Around the World in Winnipeg in collaboration with Tyndall Park Community Centre, and it is anticipated to take place every weekend from spring till fall. Last year, in 2021, there was a very successful Track the Flavor Truck initiative led by Around the World in Winnipeg, working with local food trucks and Tyndall Park Community Centre, where $2,500 were raised and donated to Harvest Manitoba. Now, Madam Speaker, the market is special in many ways. It contributes to our diversity and vibrancy in Tyndall Park by showcasing local vendors and local talent. It is open to everyone and has vendors ranging from food to crafters to people who make their own jams and preserves to farmers and artists. The market is also seeking applicants, so if you're local to Tyndall Park and surrounding areas and have a product, service, or skill you are interested in showcasing or selling at the market, please email tyndallcommunitymarket@gmail.com. And if you are a youth entrepreneur, there are some designated free spots with the goal of building future entrepreneurs and leaders in our community. Madam Speaker, the goal is to run a successful community market, but as with any new initiative, groups need help. That is why I'm asking my MLA colleagues, but even more so, I'm calling on those who live in Tyndall Park to come on out to enjoy the market. The first date will be May 7th, and it will run on Saturdays from 4 to 9 and Sundays 3 to 8. Lastly, Madam Speaker, I want to congratulate and thank both Lynn and Lou Arlequin, the co-founders of Tyndall Community Market, for caring the way that they do and bringing our community together. I can't wait to attend. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The waits for surgeries and important diagnostic tests continues to grow, Madam Speaker. 6,000 more people are waiting in pain, waiting with uncertainty since last count. That brings us close to 170,000 Manitobans who are now waiting while this government refuses to act. That's right, Madam Speaker, their plan to do nothing to solve the problem simply isn't working. The wait lists are growing. More people than ever before are waiting in pain. Will the Premier stand up today and announce a date by which the surgery and diagnostic test backlog will be cleared?
The Honourable First Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank our Diagnostic and Surgical Recovery Task Force for the incredible work that they're doing, and we look forward to further updates from them moving forward, Madam Speaker. What I will say, when they did update Manitobans most recently, we had CT scans that were down, the wait list reduction of 2,252, wow. Ultrasounds, wait list reduction of 3,931. Wow. MRI is a reduction of 2,214. Madam Speaker, we are making progress. There's more work to do. We look forward to the update from the task force.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, the waits for MRIs and CT scans are increasing. The number of people waiting for a surgery is skyrocketing. This government can't even keep a simple promise to hold an update to deliver news to the people of Manitoba. Madam Speaker, behind every one of these figures is a person waiting in pain. When we talk about 167, almost 170,000 Manitobans waiting, these are not abstractions. These are people that we know in the community. These are loved ones. These are people who are suffering right now while all this government does is stand and make excuses and try to torque the facts. Will the Premier simply change the page, stand up today, and announce a date by which to clear the backlog?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, the only one who's torquing the facts is the Leader of the Opposition. Right. I just stated in this chamber, Madam Speaker, CT scans, according to our Diagnostic and Surgical Recovery Task Force in their latest post on their website, Madam Speaker, in their update, CT scans, an improvement of 12%, Madam Speaker. Ultrasounds, an improvement of 16%, Madam Speaker. MRIs, an improvement of 13%, Madam Speaker. We recognize there's more work to do. We thank the task force for the work they're doing. We will ensure that all Manitobans get the surgical and diagnostic procedures that they need when they need them, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on the final supplementary.
You know, Madam Speaker, we listen to the doctors. Right. And what the doctors said today is that the wait lists are increasing. More than 6,000 people more are waiting. That's close to 170,000 Manitobans waiting in pain. And no, we don't listen to the government when it comes to that 167,000 Manitobans waiting in pain. We listen to the doctors. We know that the Premier and the failed former ministers of health always like to attack doctors. But how did that work out for them? Not super well, Madam Speaker. And now we're talking about Manitobans waiting in pain. Will the PCs stop heckling long enough to stand in their places today and announce a date by which to clear the surgical and diagnostic backlog?
The Honourable First Minister.
Madam Speaker, again, we are listening to doctors, and certainly there are doctors who are on our diagnostic and surgical recovery task force who have been tasked with this very issue of eliminating the surgical and diagnostic backlogs, Madam Speaker. So what I will say is the Leader of the Opposition, while he wants to continue to put false information on the record, Madam Speaker, we will continue to put the facts on the record. The facts are that in areas of CT scans, ultrasounds, and MRIs, we are making headway, Madam Speaker. We recognize there's more work to be done. We thank the task force for the work that they are doing. We will continue to take the advice of the professionals when it comes to the elimination of the surgical and diagnostic backlogs, not from the Leader of the Opposition, not from the members opposite that are chirping from their seats, Madam Speaker. We will continue to take the advice of the professionals.
Back when a health minister would last more than a year.
Order. 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 Somebody not looking to see that the speaker is standing, and when the speaker is standing, I'm expecting that there's going to be respect in the room for the role of the speaker, and that is something I'm asking all of you to please cooperate with. The Honourable Leader the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a new question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Manitoba Court has ruled that the former CAO of the City of Winnipeg accepted a bribe as part of the police headquarter construction. That is what we know so far. Manitobans deserve to know more. Now, the Mayor of Winnipeg has said that calling an inquiry is in the city's best interest. The current council of the City of Winnipeg is in agreement on that point. Now, we could get more information, we could get more answers on the record. This would help uncover just what went wrong with this police headquarters deal. Will the Premier listen to the Mayor of Winnipeg? Will she call an inquiry into the construction of the police headquarters?
Yep. The Honourable First Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition knows that this matter continues to remain before the courts, and Madam Speaker, we will watch what comes out of that and what ends up being on the record as a result of those court proceedings. The Mayor Bowman absolutely knows that the city has the ability to investigate these types of matters, Madam Speaker. He has the ability, they have the ability to question people under oath, Madam Speaker. If the mayor wants to go in that direction, he has the powers to do so.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a supplementary question.
You know, Madam Speaker, the PCs and the Premier know full well that civil action does not prevent them from calling an inquiry. No objection to that statement of fact. We also know that the Mayor of the City of Winnipeg wants there to be an inquiry. We know that the current Council of Winnipeg wants there to be an inquiry. We also know that the member for Kirkfield Park was a member of council at the time that this happened, and he was chair of the Finance Committee. There's a reasonable apprehension of bias there. It means that at the very least, the member for Kirkfield Park should recuse himself from any decisions or conversations about calling an inquiry. Will the Premier assure this House that the member for Kirkfield Park will recuse himself from all discussions about an inquiry into the police headquarters?
Yeah, Scott.
Order. The Honourable First Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition continues with his smear campaign. Madam Speaker, we will continue to do what Manitobans have asked us to do, Madam Speaker. They have asked us to make life more affordable for Manitobans. We are continuing to do that, Madam Speaker. They've asked us to strengthen health care, Madam Speaker. We will continue to do so. They've asked us for economic recovery and growth, Madam Speaker. We will continue to provide a better, brighter future for all Manitobans. While they are in the gutter politics, Madam Speaker, we will continue to work on behalf of Manitobans.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on the final supplementary.
It should be very easy for the Premier to assure Manitobans that the member for Kirkfield Park will recuse himself from a matter that took place while he was chair of the City Finance Committee. The fact that she does not is very telling. Yesterday, we also learned that the former mayor of Winnipeg, Sam Cates, donated to the Premier's leadership campaign. We know that Mr. Cates oversaw the building of the police headquarters. And so far, the Premier has refused to call an inquiry into that scandal. The Premier should listen to the calls of the Mayor of City of Winnipeg. Will the Premier take action and call an inquiry today?
The Honourable First Minister.
Madam Speaker, I've stated already that this matter remains before the courts. I believe the member opposite is aware of that. We need to allow the process to go forward, Madam Speaker. We will continue to follow what the findings are there, Madam Speaker. Mayor Bowman knows that he has the ability now, the city has the ability to investigate these types of matters. He has the ability to question people under oath. If he wants to go down that route, Madam Speaker, he's welcome to do so. He has the powers to do so.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The list of wealthy insiders who donated to the Premier's campaign was finally released yesterday, only a day before the Fort White by-election. Sam Cates is on the list. We've been calling for an inquiry into the scandal that he oversaw as mayor. I hope his donation hasn't influenced the Premier's refusal to call an inquiry. She should ignore the money, Madam Speaker, and do what's right for Manitobans. Will she get up today and call an inquiry into the scandal at the city?
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Of course, once again, the sort of mudslinging from the opposition is trying to obscure the truth. And the truth is, as stated by Derek Olson, a senior litigator and a former commission counsel for the Phoenix Sinclair inquiry that was called into the handling of the family services system when the NDP were in government, said that there certainly is a preference to see civil proceedings concluded before an inquiry is held to avoid possible inconsistencies or conflicting results. That's from a commissioner from the Phoenix Sinclair inquiry. I invite the member to look it up, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. John's on a supplementary question.
Yesterday, we found out who bankrolled the Premier's election campaign. It wasn't the Premier. She couldn't even spare $1 from her $31 million to donate to her own campaign.
Really?
Instead, she asked all of her wealthy friends to do so. Ask a business person what they think of a CEO who doesn't buy stock in their own company. That's not a good sign, Madam Speaker. Will the Premier tell the House why she didn't donate to her own campaign?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, I have no idea what the member is talking about, and I'm only comforted by the fact I don't think she has any idea what she's talking about either, Madam Speaker. It is true, Madam Speaker. I believe that many, many Manitobans wanted to support this Premier in her role, Madam Speaker, and we can see why, because she's a dedicated person, given her entire life to much of her life to civil service, Madam Speaker, wanted to ensure that her skills were brought to bear to benefit the people of Manitoba, and many, many people wanted to support her along the way in doing that, Madam Speaker. If the NDP are jealous because they can't raise money, if they're upset that they can't raise money, if they're upset because they can't win a by-election, well, we'll see what happens tonight, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. John's on a final supplementary.
The Premier ranks last across all of Canada. And on top of her poor ranking, her performance over the last 5 months, I'm sure, has her donors very worried. Failing on health care, leaving Manitobans to take care of themselves, and making out-of-touch remarks. And the Premier wants us to believe that she only found out about the donors list when she sent her thank you cards. We know that's not true, Madam Speaker. They're her wealthy friends who I'm sure are having buyer's remorse right now. Will the Premier be refunding any of the donations she received during the leadership campaign?
Yeah, good question.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yes, Madam Speaker, we are guilty of having hundreds of people who want to donate to support the Premier. We are guilty of having thousands of people who want to donate to support the PC Party of Manitoba. Those are all true things. Of course, the NDP tried for many years to try to have the vote tax because they couldn't raise any money for their own party, Madam Speaker, so they had to bring in that scheme to try to get money into their coffers. I know the member opposite is very negative about a lot of things, Madam Speaker. We have an economy that's growing. We have among the lowest unemployment in all of Canada. It's spring in Manitoba, Madam Speaker. The restrictions are lifting. The Jets, well, they probably are going to do better in the next 20 days, and the Bombers are going to repeat in the Grey Cup. There's lots to celebrate in Manitoba today and in the future, especially under this Premier. Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, support workers who support adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities are facing challenges like never before. They've taken huge risks during this pandemic, but their wages are not keeping up. There is a tremendous labor shortage in this field, which needs to change. Will the minister ensure that these skilled professionals can afford to keep working in these very important jobs?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'm very pleased that the member asked this question because it gives me an opportunity to rise in this House and thank the hundreds of dedicated workers who came to work each and every day throughout the pandemic to care for nearly 7,000 Manitobans with intellectual disabilities. We certainly salute them. We applaud their efforts. We did provide support through the Pandemic Staffing Support Program. We are in conversations in terms of how we can make their work environment sustainable so that we can have a strong recruitment, retention aspect to enhancing their work sector, and I'll be more than happy to give updates to this House in days to come. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Wolseley on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, wages for those who support adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities are falling far behind. These workers are dedicated and they are committed and they provide dignified care, but many of them are living in poverty, and that is not right. You can actually get paid more at a starting job at Tim Hortons than at a starting job in some of the houses in this province taking care of people with disabilities. We need a government prepared to make a difference. Will the minister change direction and start paying these workers what they deserve?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, I'd like to thank the member for pointing out that under the NDP government, CLDS workers received zero increase in 17 years. Our government is going to correct that. Our government is going to correct the wrong path that the NDP started down by ignoring these workers, and we are going to be helping build a sustainable workforce and providing them with the wages that they deserve. I'd also like to take this opportunity that also under the NDP, they did absolutely nothing to support children with disabilities. That is why we brought forward an $8 million bridge program to help children with intellectual and developmental disabilities get the support that they need.
The Honourable Member for Wolseley on a final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the staffing situation for community support workers is dire. Nonprofits are not able to provide competitive wages, and inflation is now 5.7%, and staff turnover has gotten worse. Some clients have to have 200, 300, 400 workers in their lifetime or more, and this is really bad for the people who need support. This government has had 6 years to make a difference on this file. People's wages have been frozen. We need a government prepared to address this problem. Will the minister provide new funding for community support professionals today?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Madam Speaker, our government has been investing more in our budget each year to support people with disabilities, more than the NDP ever did. Right. And we will be providing stability and sustainability initiatives to ensure that we have a strong, stable workforce for people living with developmental disabilities. This was work that was neglected for 17 years under the NDP government, where people slid deeper into poverty. We are going to correct that record. We are going to make investments. We're going to continue making investments so that people living with disabilities can have a dignified life in the province of Manitoba.
The Honourable Member for Point Douglas.
Madam Speaker, when a person claims CPP early at the age of 60, it results in a large reduction to the money they receive for the rest of their lives. When I raised a concern last week about the PC government doing just that, the minister just deflected and refused to answer the question. People like Bertrand Murdoch are being forced to take CPP early against their will, and if they don't, they're being cut off of EIA. The result, Mr. Murdoch is now going to be evicted at the end of the month because he was kicked off EIA disability in January for refusing to take CPP early. Will the minister help Mr. Murdoch and immediately stop this practice of forcing EIA recipients to claim CPP early?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, I'd like to just point out for the member that we have invested nearly 25% more in EIA since we formed office than the NDP government ever did. We're nearly $500 million up from their $383 million.
Yeah.
In regards to her constituent, I can assure the member that the minute that she had brought that information to my attention, instead of debating it on the floor of the legislature, I went to my department and I asked my department to review the case and to get in touch with her constituent, which I have been assured that the department is working very closely with her constituent. In fact, calls were made as late as yesterday afternoon, I'm told, and if there's more work to be done, we will certainly be doing that personalized casework, not on the floor of the legislature, but in the department where it belongs.
The honourable member for Point Douglas on a supplementary question.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker. Many letters were sent to that minister, and she knows it. Only because it was brought to the floor has she now begun to take notice of it. Today, a court hearing is beginning against this government's wrongful practice of clawing back CPP benefits to pay back provincial disability assistance, leaving people without enough money to meet their basic needs. 2 years ago, the Manitoba Court of Appeals found it illegal for the government to force people on disability EIA to claim CPP early. Madam Speaker, clawing back and forcing people off social assistance is wrong for everyone, disability or not. The minister has a chance to right the wrong today. Will she do the right thing and stop this practice of forcing EIA recipients to claim CPP and stop forcing Mr. Murdoch from claiming CPP as well? As she well knows, that call was saying
the member's time has expired. The Honourable Minister of Families.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I would like to point out that our government has exempted nearly 50 different benefit programs from the EIA regulations so that people can keep certain benefits as well as their EIA benefits. I would also like to point out for the member that we have invested significantly more in our EIA program, more than 25% increase since when they were in government. We've also quadrupled the Rent Assist program so that we've got more people receiving more benefits. In regards to her constituent, I can assure the House that we have made the appropriate calls and we're handling casework where it belongs, in the department, not on the floor of the Manitoba Legislature.
Shame on you guys.
The honourable member for Point Douglas on a final supplementary.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker, and I spoke to Mr. Murdoch, and he is still being forced to take CPP or not get his EIA benefits reinstated. So that minister knows that. She's putting more people in poverty because they're being stretched thin and thinner because this government is forcing them to take CPP early, which means later in their life they're getting less. Claiming CPP means that people are getting a third less. It's forcing more people into poverty now and will have greater effects long term. They're stretched thin and having trouble paying basic needs like hydro, which this government has continually raised year after year. It's wrong and the minister knows it, and will she rectify this today? Will she stop this practice of forcing EIA recipients to claim CPP early, including Mr. Murdoch?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And what was wrong was kicking 26% of all Manitobans off of the Manitoba housing waitlist, and that member knows it, but that was exactly what her government did. They kicked people off of the waitlist. What our government is doing is investing more to reduce poverty in the province of Manitoba, including exempting more than 50 other benefits from the EIA regulation, including CPP in certain circumstances. So we are making life more affordable. We're raising more people out of poverty than ever before. That is why we invested 25% more in our EIA budget than the NDP ever did. Madam Speaker, we know we have a long way to go. We have more people to lift up out of poverty. We know that the last 2 years has been a challenging time for people in poverty. We're not done the work, but we're going to continue it.
The honourable member for the Pas-Kamisak.
Madam Speaker. The experience of a miscarriage or stillbirth can be incredibly emotional and physically traumatizing for the parents. It is crucial that folks are able to access paid time to care for themselves and take time to grieve and heal. Manitoba's employment standards currently fall short in providing the necessary time off. That is why I introduced Bill 219 for a second time today to ensure all grieving parents have access to a separate and fully funded paid leave. Will the minister legislate paid leave for parents grieving a miscarriage or stillbirth?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the question from the member opposite. Interested in reading the bill that she introduced, and we're looking forward to debating it.
The Honourable Member for the Pas-Camissac on a supplementary question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. During the already traumatic and stressful experience of a miscarriage or stillbirth, parents should not have to stress about their next paycheck. In Manitoba, there is no full wage replacement available for parents who are grieving a miscarriage or a stillbirth. If a pregnant person miscarries, they can apply for EI at a fraction of their normal wage. This is not a meaningful support for people who shouldn't have to stress about finances during an already devastating time. Will the minister support paid leave for parents grieving a miscarriage or stillbirth?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to member opposite for the additional information. I look forward to hearing more information as the bill is debated.
The Honourable Member for the Pas-Camissac on a final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Manitoba has the unique opportunity to lead with compassion on this issue by legislating a paid leave for parents grieving a miscarriage or stillbirth. There is no provincial jurisdiction that provides a full wage replacement for grieving parents in Canada. Manitoba can be a first. Will this government do what is right and legislate paid leave for Manitobans grieving a miscarriage or stillbirth? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and there are several programs available through finance for EIA or for mental health that are available. We're reviewing all those programs, and we're listening to the member opposite to see how we can best respond to this. I know there are several programs available, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have to ask whether the PC's handling of pandemic procurement has been as bad as the rest of their pandemic preparedness and response. As these documents that I table show, in 2020, this government bought $19 million US, or $26.6 million Canadian, of masks that didn't fit and couldn't be used, $1.2 million in unusable, unapproved hand sanitizer made with fuel ethanol, a non-refundable down payment of $7.2 million to Providence Therapeutics for a vaccine booster that will never be delivered. Just 3 procurement deals cost the public purse $35 million with nothing to show for it. Can the Premier explain how this happened under the PC government?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, perhaps the member opposite was not present during the pandemic. I'm not sure what he was doing. I know that our department was responding to the public health crisis, and we did everything we could to make sure that health was supported throughout that. We found masks throughout the world that we could use in times of need when we couldn't buy N95 masks anywhere, Madam Speaker. We have production in Manitoba now producing those masks so we can make sure that they're here for any future situations like this, and the Manitoba Emergency Response Warehouse has been set up, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface on a supplementary question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We know the PC government spent $35 million with nothing to show for it in just 3 procurement deals. The hand sanitizer wasn't safe and was never supposed to be sold, according to Health Canada. The vaccine money is gone, and there were millions of masks that couldn't be used. For months after they were purchased, people in healthcare and early childhood education were using masks from the last H1N1 pandemic a decade ago. What happened to the $26.6 million worth of masks that this government bought and couldn't be used?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, we did indeed place a $35 million order with the federal government, the first province to do so when they offered supplies of PPE for the pandemic. They couldn't fulfill the order, Madam Speaker. We had to go throughout the world to find supplies for our healthcare system. We bought hand sanitizer that was approved by Health Canada, and then they rescinded that approval, Madam Speaker. That was not used. So, Madam Speaker, we work closely with all of our federal and provincial counterparts to make sure that we could keep Manitobans safe.
The honourable member for Tyndall Park on a final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are literally thousands of people fleeing from Ukraine to Canada, many of which will be coming to Manitoba. There have been extreme changes to our healthcare system over the last 5 years, and the issue of healthcare, both physical and mental, are on the minds of everyone, especially those coming from Ukraine. Will the province commit to allowing full and free access to those coming from Ukraine and ensure proper investments are made to ensure timely healthcare services for everyone?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Manitoba government support has been immediate, strong, and unwavering. We've mobilized all of government's weeks to prepare for large-scale arrivals to deliver full range of provincial settlement supports for housing, health and mental health care, K-12 education, childcare, English language services, social assistance, job placements, also $650,000 in humanitarian aid to Ukraine Congress and the King Ukraine Foundation thus far. We have pledged to welcome as many Ukrainians seeking haven as soon as the Government of Canada determines how many are coming. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for McPhillips.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, stakeholders like Manitoba municipalities have urged our government to take science-based action when it comes to the use of pesticides in Manitoba, as well as consistency with federal agencies. Can the minister elaborate on Bill 22 and what the stakeholders are saying about science-based use of pesticides?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Climate and Parks.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the member from McPhillips for that question. Last week, I was proud to introduce Bill 22, which will amend the Environment Act to allow the use of Health Canada federally approved cosmetic pesticides throughout Manitoba. Unlike the members opposite, Madam Speaker, our government stands on the side of science. Madam Speaker, the current restrictions on cosmetic pesticides, which were introduced by the former NDP government, were based on ideology and ideology alone. These products go through a rigorous testing process, Madam Speaker, and are continually reviewed to ensure they are safe. Last week, following the introduction of Bill 22, I was pleased to be joined by Cam Blight, President of AMM, and David Hinton, the Manitoba Nurseries Landscape Association, which indicated, Madam Speaker, they've seen dramatically higher costs and decreased effectiveness associated with them.
The member's time has expired. The honourable member for St. Vital.
Madam Speaker, inflation is 5.7%. For the coming school year, that means cuts to the University of Manitoba. This provincial funding puts U of M 5% behind the rate of inflation. Virtually all programs at the university sought no new resources whatsoever. Again, inflation is 5.7%. The approach this government has is doing lasting damage to our post-secondary institutions. As schools develop their budget, will the minister guarantee no cuts, including inflation, at post-secondary institutions for this coming school year? Empty promises.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Madam Speaker, our government is committed to work collaboratively with our post-secondary partners and students to provide the best quality of post-secondary education in Manitoba while keeping the tuition one of the lowest in Western Canada. We'll continue to work with partners to deliver on our commitment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for St. Vital on a supplementary question.
Funding below the rate of inflation means cuts. And since 2016, the PC government has cut operating funding for many post-secondary institutions by millions of dollars. Conservative cuts hurt. Inflation is 5.7%. The situation for next year is worse. This is simply unacceptable. Will the minister reverse course and commit to no cuts at post-secondary institutions for this coming school year?
Simple question.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Madam Speaker, as I've mentioned before, our government continues to invest over $1 billion every year in post-secondary education. This year's funding announcement includes a $10.3 million boost in ongoing grant to support the nursing seat expansion and $350,000 for the permanent expansion of Université de Saint-Boniface Bachelor of Education program. We will continue making key investments to provide world-class post-secondary education here in Manitoba. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Good job.
The Honourable Member for St. Vital on a final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, this government's cuts and their priorities are simply out of line with the rest of Manitobans. Conservative cuts hurt. Manitobans want and deserve a government that prioritizes quality and affordable education. Again, inflation is running at 5.7%. The minister thinks he can solve it by jacking up tuition and charging some students even more than others. And that's not right. We need real investment in education, in colleges and in universities. Will the minister reverse course and commit to no cuts to colleges and universities in this coming school year?
Simple ask.
The Honourable Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday I had a great opportunity to tour the engineering building at the University of Manitoba and had a meeting with the President and Board Chair of the University of Manitoba. I was very pleased to hear their plans and their commitment to provide world-class education to our students in our province. Madam Speaker, our government will continue to support our post-secondary partners to strive, unlike the NDP, who took the ideological approach to the post-secondary education in Manitoba. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for the Maples.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This government's interference cost all of us more. Last year, $60 million was transferred out of MPI and into a core government operations. They plan to take another $53 million this month. Ratepayers should be enjoying an additional 10% decrease per their insurance. Instead, this PC government took it away. Will the minister reverse the decision and give the money to the Manitobans today?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. There is no question that when the former NDP government moved drivers licensing into MPI, they set it up very, very badly, Madam Speaker, and that has been left for our government to try to deal with it, and we continue to ensure that the resources are there, even though it was set up so badly under the NDP government. But of course, there is good news coming out of Manitoba Public Insurance. We were all glad to see that more than $300 million in rebates were returned to Manitobans to make life a little bit easier and a little bit more affordable for those ratepayers, Madam Speaker. We all shudder to think what life would be like under the NDP Liberal coalition government, Madam Speaker.
The time for oral questions has expired. Petitions. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you kindly, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background of this petition is as follows. 1. Population of those aged 55 plus has grown to approximately 2,500 in the city of Thompson. 2. A large percentage of people in this age group require necessary medical foot care and treatment. 3. A large percentage of those who are elderly and or diabetic are also living on low incomes. 4. The Northern Regional Health Authority, NRHA, previously provided essential medical foot care services to seniors and those living with diabetes until 2019, then subsequently cut the program after the last 2 nurses filling those positions retired. 5, the number of seniors and those with diabetes has only continued to grow in Thompson and surrounding areas. 6, there's no adequate medical care available in the city and region, whereas the city of Winnipeg has 14 medical foot care centers. 7, the implications of inadequate or lack of podiatric care can lead to amputations. 8, the City of Thompson also serves as a regional healthcare service provider, and the need for foot care extends beyond just those served in the capital city of the province. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to provide the services of 2 nurses to restore essential medical foot care treatment to the City of Thompson effective April 1, 2022. This petition has been signed by George Bralmere, Tracy Smith, Murray Garriak, and many other Manitobans.
In accordance with our Rule 132(6), when petitions are read, they are deemed to be received by the House. Further petitions, the Honourable Member for Kiewitinook.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. To the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba, the background of this petition is as follows. 1. The population of those aged 55 plus has grown to approximately 2,500 in the City of Thompson. 2. A large percentage of people in this age group require necessary medical foot care and treatment. 3. A large percentage of those who are elderly and/or diabetic are also living on low incomes. 4. The Northern Regional Health Authority, the NRHA, previously provided essential medical foot care services to seniors and those living with diabetes until 2019, then subsequently cut the program after the last 2 nurses filling those positions retired. 5. The number of seniors and those with diabetes has only continued to grow in Thompson and surrounding areas. 6. There is no adequate medical care available in the city and region, whereas the City of Winnipeg has 14 medical foot care centers. 7. The implications of inadequate or lack of podiatric care can lead to amputations. 8. The City of Thompson also serves as a regional healthcare service provider, and the need for foot care extends beyond just those served in the capital city of the province. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to provide services of 2 nurses to restore essential medical foot care treatment to the City of Thompson effective April 1, 2022. This petition has been signed by Sue O'Brien, Christine Reed, Stephen McKay, and many, many other Manitobans.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Thank you much, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. 1. Manitoba women, girls, Two-Spirit, genderqueer, non-binary, and trans persons deserve to be safe and supported when accessing abortion services. 2. Limited access to effective and safe abortion services contributes to detrimental outcomes and consequences for those seeking an abortion, as an estimated 25 million unsafe abortions occur worldwide each year. 3, the provincial government's reckless health care cuts have created inequity within the healthcare system, whereby access to the abortion pill, mifegymiso, and surgical abortions are less accessible for northern and rural individuals than individuals in southern Manitoba, as they face travel barriers to access the handful of non-urban healthcare professionals who are trained to provide medical abortions. 4, for over 5 years, and over the administration of 3 failed health ministers, the provincial government operated under the pretense that reproductive health was not the responsibility of the Ministry of Health and Seniors Care, and shifted the responsibility to a secretariat with no policy, program, or financial authority within the healthcare system. 5, and for over 4 years, the provincial government has refused to support Bill 200, the Safe Access to Abortion Services Act, which will ensure the safety of Manitoba women, girls, two-spirit, genderqueer, non-binary, and trans persons accessing abortion services and the staff who provide such services by establishing buffer zones for anti-choice Manitobans around clinics. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to immediately ensure effective and safe access to abortion services for individuals regardless of where they reside in Manitoba, and to ensure that buffer zones are immediately legislated. Signed by many Manitobans.
The honourable member for River Heights.
Madam Speaker, I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. People who suffer hearing loss due to aging, illness, employment, or accident not only lose the ability to communicate effectively with friends, relatives, or colleagues, they also can experience unemployment, social isolation, and struggles with mental health. A cochlear implant is a life-changing electronic device that allows deaf people to receive and process sounds and speech, and also can partially restore hearing in people who have severe hearing loss and who do not benefit from conventional hearing aids. A processor behind the ear captures and processes sound signals, which are transmitted to a receiver implanted into the skull that relays the information to the inner ear. The technology has been available since 1989 through the Central Speech and Hearing Clinic, founded in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The surgical hearing implant program began implanting patients in the fall of 2011 and marked the completion of 250 cochlear implant surgeries in Manitoba in the summer of 2018. The program has implanted about 60 devices since the summer of 2018, as it is only able to implant about 40 to 45 devices per year. There are no upfront costs to Manitoba residents who proceed with cochlear implant surgery, as Manitoba Health covers the surgical procedure, internal implant, and the first external sound processor. Newfoundland and Manitoba have the highest estimated implantation cost of all provinces. Alberta has one of the best programs with Alberta Aids for Daily Living, and their cost share means the patient pays only approximately $500 out of pocket. Assistive Devices program in Ontario covers 75% of the cost, up to a maximum amount of $5,444 for a cochlear implant replacement speech processor. The BC Adult Cochlear Implant Program offers subsidized replacements to aging sound processors through the Sound Processor Replacement Program. This provincially funded program is available to those cochlear implant recipients whose sound processors have reached 6 to 7 years of age. The cochlear implant is a lifelong commitment, however, as the technology changes over time. Parts and software become no longer functional or available. The cost of upgrading a cochlear implant in Manitoba of approximately $11,000 is much more expensive than in other provinces, as adult patients are responsible for the upgrade costs of their sound processor. In Manitoba, pediatric patients under 18 years of age are eligible for funding assistance through the Cochlear Implant Speech Processor Replacement Program, which provides up to 80% of the replacement costs associated with the device upgrade. It is unreasonable that this technology is inaccessible to many citizens of Manitoba who must choose between hearing and deafness due to financial constraints, because the costs of maintaining the equipment are prohibitive for low-income earners or those on a fixed income, such as old age pension or employment and income assistance. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to provide financing for upgrades to the Cochlear implant covered under Medicare, or provide funding assistance through the Cochlear implant speech processor replacement program to assist with the replacement costs associated with the device upgrade. Signed by Padev Anderson, Ken Rose, Glenn Gunther, and many other Manitobans.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background of this petition is as follows. Number one, till recently, diagnostic medical tests, including for blood and fluid samples, were available and accessible in most medical clinics. Number two, Dynacare blood test labs have consolidated their blood and fluid testing services by closing 25 of its labs. Number three, the provincial government has cut diagnostic testing at many clinic sites, and residents now have to travel to different locations to get their testing done, even for a simple blood test or a urine sample. Number four, further travel challenges for vulnerable and elderly residents of Northeast Winnipeg may result in fewer tests being done or delays in testing, with the attendant effects of increased health care costs and poor individual patient outcomes. Number five, COVID-19 emergency rules have resulted in long outdoor lineups, putting vulnerable residents at further risk in extreme weather, be it hot or cold. Moreover, these long lineups have resulted in longer wait times for services and poorer service in general. Number six, Manitoba residents value the convenience and efficiency of the healthcare system when they're able to give their samples at the time of the doctor visit. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to immediately demand Dynacare maintain all of the phlebotomy blood sample sites existing prior to the COVID-19 public health emergency, and allow all Manitobans to get their blood and urine tests done when visiting their doctor, thereby facilitating local access to blood testing services. And this petition is signed by many, many Manitobans.
The Honourable Member for St. Vital.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. To the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background of this petition is as follows. 1. The population of those aged 55 plus has grown to approximately 2,500 in the city of Thompson. 2. A large percentage of people in this age group require necessary medical foot care and treatment. 3. A large percentage of those who are elderly and or diabetic are also living on low incomes. 4. The Northern Regional Health Authority, NRHA, previously provided essential medical foot care services to seniors and those living with disabilities until 2019. Then, subsequently, cut the program after the last 2 nurses filling those positions retired. 5. The number of seniors and those with diabetes has only continued to grow in Thompson and surrounding areas. 6. There is no adequate medical care available in the city and region, whereas the city of Winnipeg has 14 medical foot care centers.
A few more minutes.
7. The implications of inadequate or lack of pediatric care can lead to amputations. 8. The City of Thompson also serves as a regional hub healthcare service provider, and the need for foot care extends beyond just those served in the capital city of the province. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to provide the services of 2 nurses to restore essential medical foot care treatment to the City of Thompson effective April 1st, 2022. This petition has been signed by Miranda Constant, Dana Braun, and Colleen Prontno, and many other Manitobans. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba, oh, sorry, I missed the first page. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. To the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background of this petition is as follows. An estimated 1 million people suffer from eating disorders in Canada. Eating disorders are serious mental illnesses affecting one's physical, psychological, and social function, and have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. The development and treatment of eating disorders are influenced by the social determinants of health, including food and income security, access to housing, health care, and mental health supports. It is important to share the diverse experiences of people with eating disorders across all ages, genders, and identities, including Indigenous, Black, and racialized people, queer and gender diverse people, people with disabilities, people with chronic illness, and people with co-occurring mental health conditions or addictions. It is necessary to increase awareness and education about the impact of those living with or affected by eating disorders in order to dispel dangerous stereotypes and myths about these illnesses. Setting aside 1 week each year to focus attention on eating disorders will heighten public understanding, increase awareness of culturally relevant resources and supports for those impacted by eating disorders, and encourage Manitobans to develop healthier relationships with their bodies. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to support a declaration that the first week in February of each year be known as Eating Disorders Awareness Week. This has been signed by Barb Miles, Lindsay Barsden, and Nicole Millette, and many other Manitobans.
The honourable member for Concordia.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. Number 1, the population of those aged 55 plus has grown to approximately 2,500 in the city of Thompson. Number 2, a large percentage of people in this age group require necessary medical foot care and treatment. Number 3, a large percentage of those who are elderly and or diabetic are also living on low incomes. Number 4, the Northern Regional Health Authority, NRHA, previously provided essential medical foot care services to seniors and those living with diabetes until 2019, then subsequently cut the program after the last 2 nurses filling those positions retired. Number 5, the number of seniors and those with diabetes has only continued to grow in Thompson and surrounding areas. Number 6, there is no adequate medical care available in the city and region, whereas the city of Winnipeg has 14 medical foot care centers. Number 7, the implications of inadequate or lack of podiatric care can lead to amputations. Number 8, the city of Thompson also serves as a regional healthcare service provider, and the need for foot care extends beyond just those served in the capital city of the province. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to provide the services of 2 nurses to restore essential medical foot care treatment to the city of Thompson, effective April 1st, 2020. And this petition, Madam Speaker, is signed by many Manitobans.
Yes.
Grievances, orders of the day, government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. First on House business, pursuant to Rule 33(7), I'm announcing that the private members' resolution to be considered on the next Tuesday of private members' business will be the one put forward by the Honourable Member for McPhillips. And the title of that resolution is Recognizing Climate Resiliency and Green Strategies in Manitoba Transportation.
It has been announced that pursuant to Rule 33(7), the private member's resolution to be considered on the next Tuesday of private member's business will be one put forward by the Honourable Member for McPhillips. The title of the resolution is Recognizing Climate Resiliency and Green Strategies in Manitoba Transportation. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you for that announcement, Madam Speaker. Could you please call this afternoon for debate second reading on bills number 26, 15, 16, and 23?
It has been announced that by the Honourable Government House Leader that the House will consider the following bills this afternoon. Second reading Bill 26, second reading Bill 15, debate on second reading of Bill 16, and second reading of Bill 23. I will now call second reading Bill 26, the Officers of the Assembly Act, various acts amended. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Education, that Bill number 26, the Officers of the Assembly Act, various acts amended, be now read a second time and be referred to a committee of this House. His Honour the Administrator has been advised of the bill, and I table the message.
It has been moved by the Honourable Minister of Justice, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Education, that Bill number 26, the Officers of the Legislative Assembly, various acts amended, be now read a second time and be referred to a committee of this House. His Honour the Administrator has been advised of the bill, and the message has been tabled. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is a pleasure to speak to this bill this afternoon in the Manitoba Legislature. The focus of this bill is to address inconsistencies in the enabling legislation for officers of the Manitoba Legislative Assembly and their deputies, which can create misunderstanding and uncertainty for members of the Legislative Assembly and the public in general. Manitoba has 8 statutory officers of the Legislative Assembly, often, sometimes, mistakenly, I think, referred to as independent officers. I know they prefer to be referred to as officers of the Legislative Assembly, that help the members of this Legislative Assembly comply with the rules and processes of the Assembly and monitor and assess government program effectiveness and performance. These OLAs are responsible for upholding and promoting the fundamental principles of democracy, fairness, transparency, and sound governance. Each officer of the Legislative Assembly is assigned a specific mandate through statute to oversee these principles and ensure that they are respected in the operations of the executive and the legislative branches of government. The officers of the Assembly are the advocate for children and youth, the Auditor General, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, the Information and Privacy Adjudicator, the Ombudsman, and the Lobbyist Registrar. These OLAs report to the Legislative Assembly, and their financial and staff budgets are approved by the Legislative Assembly Management Commission, something we refer to as LAMC, and most officers have a permanent full-time staff complement ranging from 20 to 50 people. Despite the intent that these officers are to be independent from the Manitoba government, the officers are currently appointed by order in council, often referred to as cabinet, based on the recommendation of an individual from the Legislative Assembly Standing Committee on Legislative Affairs. Their remuneration is also determined by the Lieutenant Governor in council. And so a committee of MLAs is formed. A subcommittee is formed from a broader standing committee. They go about the process with help from staff members to recruit for the filling of these positions. A recommendation is made at that subcommittee. It comes up to the standing committee of whatever committee was struck to do the hiring, and then ultimately that recommendation is approved and signed off on by Executive Council, by Cabinet. But this bill would amend that process to require that the OLAs be appointed by a motion of the Legislative Assembly rather than the provincial cabinet, and this aligns with the practice in most other provinces. So instead of the committee being struck, the standing committee, a subcommittee then being struck, MLAs and staff on that subcommittee making the recommendation, coming back to the committee, and then being approved by cabinet, it would actually, that recommendation come to the House, and the House would approve the hiring of the officer of the Legislative Assembly, which is more consistent with them not being directly responsible to cabinet. Responsibility for OLA remuneration, their pay, would also be transferred to LAMC to align with their financial oversight for all other aspects of the office. So right now, the pay, while I believe it's negotiated through that hiring process, but it is then signed off through an order in council through cabinet, it would be done by LAMC, because LAMC, for those members in this House who have sat on LAMC before, know that every year the budgets of the officers of the Legislative Assembly come to LAMC and then get discussed and approved. And so this would be in line with that by having the pay for the officer of the Legislative Assembly also go to LAMC. Under the bill, the OLAs would be required to have a deputy OLA appointed, again with the approval of LAMC, also making it more consistent. The amendments would also clarify that the deputy OLAs are authorized to act if the OLA is absent or that position becomes vacant, which has happened from time to time. The positions of Deputy Ombudsman and Deputy Clerk of the Legislative Assembly would be enshrined in legislation to align with the practices of other large OLA offices. It should be noted that a Deputy Officer of the Legislative Assembly for the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, Information and Privacy Adjudicator, and Lobbyist Register positions would not be created due to the level of work and size of those offices. They are relatively small offices compared to the other offices. These positions have traditionally been held by one individual with the support of an administrative assistant. The bill would also establish a term limit for the Chief Electoral Officer. Manitoba is one of only 4 provinces that do not specify a term limit in legislation for the Chief Electoral Officer. The length of the term of office is proposed to be from the date of appointment until 12 months after the date set for the return of the last writ of the second general election for which the Chief Electoral Officer is responsible. So, for example, a Chief Electoral Officer is hired, they then would preside over 2 general elections, and then 12 months after that, their term would expire, and of course, they could then be renewed. This is similar to the term used in Saskatchewan and British Columbia. Other provinces and the federal government use a set number of years for a term limit. Manitoba chose to follow the election cycle term limit approach to mitigate the risk of the office being vacated during a critical time in the election schedule. Current OLAs and deputy OLAs would be grandfathered in their current roles and continue in the office upon the enactment of the bill. So the current Chief Electoral Officer would not be subject to the term limit provisions in this bill. Any new OLA or deputy OLA would be appointed under the new processes created by the bill. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we will have the opportunity to discuss this bill in more detail at committee stage. But I would conclude by saying that all of us have borne witness to the good work of officers of the Legislative Assembly. All of us have had many interactions with them. Those who've sat on LAMC have maybe had more interactions in terms of the internal workings of the office. The intention has always been, and I think from a government perspective, whether the NDP were in government, and I believe the Independent Liberals would feel the same way, that the intention was always to ensure that those offices are not only independent of government, but are seen to be independent of government. So this really puts into practice ensuring that they not only are independent of government, but they are also seen to be independent of government. So I hope that all members can accept this bill in the spirit in which it has been drafted and tabled today.
A question period of up to 15 minutes will be held. Questions may be addressed to the minister by any member in the following sequence. The first question by the official opposition critic or designate. Subsequent questions asked by critics or designates from other recognized opposition parties. Subsequent questions asked by each independent member. Remaining questions asked by any opposition member. No question or answer shall exceed 45 seconds. The honourable member for St. John's.
Miigwech, Deputy Speaker. Would the minister tell us how Bill 26 will increase transparency and fairness in how independent officers are appointed?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
It's an excellent question from my friend, and the officers of the Legislative Assembly, as she knows, and I think she may have sat on some of these processes for hiring, they are hired at a subcommittee level, but then ultimately it becomes the cabinet who has to sign the order in council. It is more transparent if that decision comes back to the Assembly and all members ratify the decision.
The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Wondering what happens with a minority government when there's an election and the chief electoral officer's term is up at a time that's coinciding with a provincial election?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
So the chief electoral officer would be able to preside over 2 general elections, and then 12 months after that second general election, the term would be up. I think the member might be suggesting, what if after that second general election, there's a minority government and there's a potential for an election? I think that, like a lot of things, the members of the Assembly would see that as a challenge and likely move pretty expediently to reappoint a chief electoral officer. This just brings us in line with other provinces. Of course, like every piece of legislation, it can't foresee every potential reality in an election cycle. But my expectation would be that the decision on the extension of
the minister's time has expired. The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Miigwech, Deputy Speaker. What prompted the Minister of Justice to bring forward these changes at this time? Where did that recommendation come from?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
It is part of my long-standing desire for peace, order, and good government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but also because I understand and I really do appreciate this Assembly. And, you know, those of us who've been here for a relatively long time, I've only been here 19 years, so half the time of the member for Elmwood, but you know, you do learn to appreciate the inner workings of things, LAMC, the roles of the officers of the Legislative Assembly, and it just became clear that it was an inconsistency. It could have gone on for a long time. I don't think there would have been any problem or anybody would have had an issue with it, but it just seemed like an opportunity to clean up something that didn't quite make sense.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
I got so many questions, Deputy Speaker. Could the Minister explain to the House which other jurisdictions follow the format of requiring a resolution of the Assembly while hiring an independent officer?
The The Honourable Minister of Justice.
So I think it's either my advancing age or the acoustics in here, but I didn't quite pick up the question that the member asked. She said something about which other provinces follow an exemption, but I didn't catch the exemption part.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Could the minister explain to the House which other jurisdictions follow the format of requiring a resolution of the Assembly while hiring an independent officer?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yes, indeed, my hearing was faulty on that. A resolution, not exemption. So my understanding is that this brings us in line with all or most other provinces in terms of not having the cabinet sign an OIC for an officer of the Legislative Assembly. But I will, for committee, and I've done this before with seen at yesterday's committee, I will ensure that I have a clear answer for the member opposite prior to my opening comments at committee when this bill comes to committee.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Miigwech, could the minister explain why it's actually important to take this decision from the authority of cabinet to the Legislative Assembly? Like, why is that important?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
It's a thoughtful question from my friend. I think that, would anything have changed, or could, what could have happened in the future? I suppose that, the legislative committee could have come back with a recommendation and cabinet could have said, no, we don't agree. Now, I don't recall that ever happening, nor do I foresee a situation where that could happen. But I do think that the perception is much better when an officer of the Legislative Assembly, who is beholden to the Assembly and not to government per se, is actually ratified by the Assembly itself.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Could the minister explain the appointment process in place for clerks in other jurisdictions?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I don't know that I have a detailed answer for how every clerk is hired. I might look to the clerk to provide some of that answer, because I know with her long experience she would have that, but not to drag her into the debate. But this particular legislation will ensure that it goes through LAMC. And again, LAMC is a body that has MLAs appointed to it. It would be similar, I think, to the Federal House Ways and Means Committee, where things are done by consensus. And again, we've been very lucky to be served by tremendous clerks in this House. Of course, the current clerk, Binks Remnant, the former clerk, and that assurance that MLAs are involved in that process, I think, has been a big part of that.
The minister's time has expired. The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Could the minister clarify the following? Will all salaries for officers of the Assembly be determined by LAMC?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
So I believe that they will be ratified by LAMC. If I understand the process correctly now, when a committee is formed to hire an officer of the Legislative Assembly and then a subcommittee is formed, they advertise for the job. People bring in their applications, send in their applications. There is a salary expectation. I believe when an offer is made to an individual, once the committee has decided who they want to hire, they do so with a salary. Now that salary then normally gets applied by cabinet. In this case, that salary expectation through the job offer would go to LAMC.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Can the minister clarify with the proposed changes in Bill 26, does LAMC now approve appointments of deputy officers for each of the independent officers? And how does that, what will that look like?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yeah, I thank my friend for the question. I believe what will happen is that the officer of the Legislative Assembly who will come to LAMC, and of course they often appear before LAMC, usually on budget issues, but they would make a recommendation in terms of who their deputy would be, and then LAMC would essentially ratify that person as a deputy. In case the officer couldn't act or was unable to act, there would always be a deputy that LAMC was aware of who would be acting in their place.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask the member, Minister, what happens when the House is perhaps not sitting and there's a need for an appointment? Would this cause delays in the process of getting some of these officers and officials appointed when the House is not sitting for one reason or the other?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yeah, it is. It's a good question, and I don't foresee that delay happening. Of course, if there was a need to ensure that the House was back to have a resolution tabled, that could always be done. We could always ensure that it would happen. But you know, it's a fair question, and I appreciate the member opposite asking it. I can provide him some more details of the different mechanisms by which these things can happen intersessionally at committee. But it is a very important question.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, I just wondered if the minister had perhaps considered options or perhaps looked to other jurisdictions to seek guidance on this question, to see whether there are other models of perhaps all parties getting together and deciding we need to hold the assembly together so that we can put forward a resolution to fill one of these positions if it is an urgent need of a vacancy.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I'm not sure that I heard all of the question. Again, I'm sure that that's my fault or the bad acoustics in here. I think he was asking about the opportunity for all members to get together when it comes to resolutions and those sorts of things. I mean, that does happen to some degree in the Manitoba Legislature. I don't know that it happens as much as members sometimes would like or would like to see more of that. Member's a relatively new member. He may have some ideas. Of course, we're having discussions around rules right now, and we have iterative discussions around rules, and there could always be rules that could be changed to provide more of that opportunity.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
Thank you. Just to clarify on that point, I was just asking, is the minister open to the idea of perhaps an all-party committee to discuss when situations were to arise, when there's a vacancy in a particular position and the House does need to be recalled so that we can pass a resolution? Is the minister open to that idea of maybe having an all-party committee to discuss when the House should or should not be recalled to fill these sort of vacant positions?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yes, I better understood the member's question thanks to my earpiece here. For sure. I mean, this is one of these topics and these situations where when it comes to officers of the Legislative Assembly, I think we've done a pretty good job, although there have been some notable exceptions, and I was a part of some of those, where there were disputes about officers of the Legislative Assembly, but 90% of the time, this is done on an all-party basis. So if there's a need for an all-party discussion about having to bring back the House to ratify a motion or something like that, if there's not another mechanism, of course. I think we all benefit by trying to make these non-political discussions when it comes to these OLAs. So that is the spirit with which this bill has been brought forward.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask the minister, if there are any other jurisdictions, even beyond Canada, where perhaps there are further degrees of independence that would allow these positions to be appointed even more independently than what is being offered in this bill. And I only ask that because in this chamber we are very, independent in one respect. We also hold partisan hats in another respect. So I wonder if the minister's thought about other options that would even increase the independence of appointments for these positions.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yeah, I suspect, I haven't done sort of a survey of the Westminster parliamentary system to see how their officers all work. That might be good work to undertake, and we could certainly look at that undertaking if the member wants. I want to be clear, right? I mean, I refer to them as officers of the Legislative Assembly. They operate independently, but they do operate under legislation of the House, and they do come to LAMC and make presentations on their budget. So, independence is always in the eye of the beholder. They're operationally independent, but of course they are tethered to this House through legislation and through the financial realities that everybody is in Manitoba, and so they present in that way. So they, as officers of the Legislative Assembly, they certainly have operational independence. But
the minister's time has expired. The honourable member for St. John's.
I gotta use it all, Deputy Speaker. So it's been almost 2 years since the Ombudsman Office released a scathing report documenting the government's lack of timely responses to FIPA requests. These same offices still regularly fail to respond to FIPA requests on time. Could the minister explain why his government has failed to improve response times since the Ombudsman report?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I suspect if I wanted to make a point on relevance, I probably could, but that's not really what I'd want to do at this time. Clearly, you know, independent officers, they do have a role to release reports. I think it was the auditor that released a scathing report on Tiger Dams, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and how the government failed to get Treasury Board authority to make purchases, and that there were all sorts of concerns about conflicts. So yes, independent officers of the Legislative Assembly have a responsibility to provide reports, and sometimes they are critical of the government.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
I think it's important that we look at improving independence when it comes to some of these appointments. Is the minister looking at improving independence in appointments of other positions for government positions? In particular, I'll just name one, for example, judges in this province. Are they looking to increase independence when it comes to appointing those types of positions?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I'm sure that the member will know that the judicial independence is a hallmark of our system of government, where you have the separation of the judiciary and the executive branch of government. That is well governed by statute, it's governed by case law, and we continue to support the independence of our judiciary.
Time for questions has expired. And before we open the floor, I just wish to draw attention to a comment made during the question period. Sometimes it's hard to hear in this place, maybe acoustics, maybe one is aging. And earpieces are available for all who wish to use them. The floor is open for debate. The honourable member for St. John's.
Thank you, Rich, Deputy Speaker. I love my earpiece. Yeah, it's great. I suggest everybody wear their earpiece. It's a good tool for the Assembly. I am happy to get up, Deputy Speaker, and speak to Bill 26, the Officers of the Assembly Act. This bill amends various acts with respect to the appointment of the following officers of the Assembly. The Advocate for Child and Youth, the Auditor General, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Clerk of the Assembly, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, the Information and Privacy Adjudicator, the Ombudsman, the Register appointed under the Lobbyist Registration Act, and currently these officers are appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council on the recommendation of a committee of the Assembly. Their remuneration is also determined by the Lieutenant Governor in Council. As a result of these amendments, the officers, other than the Clerk of the Assembly, are appointed by the Assembly on the recommendation of the Standing Committee of Legislative Affairs. The Clerk's appointment is on the recommendation of the Legislative Assembly Management Commission. The officer's remuneration is to be determined by the Legislative Assembly Management Commission. The officers may appoint their deputies with prior approval to that commission. And current officers of the Assembly and their deputies continue in office on the coming into force of this Act. And then amendments are made to the Legislative Assembly Management Commission Act and 5 other acts. So that's the gist of the bill, and we've heard questions and answers from the minister and from various members that have asked questions here. I want to spend a little bit of time just commenting on we on this side of the House certainly are in support of maintaining the independent nature of these officers of the Assembly. And so I I don't think that we have anything particularly, any particular concerns in respect of Bill 26. I think that it's always a good day when we can put an infrastructure in place that ensures the independence for offices in the Assembly. I do want to concentrate a little bit on the department or the Office of the Manitoba Advocate for Child and Youth, which will is part of Bill 26 as well. And so, as you know, Deputy Speaker, Manitoba Advocate for Child and Youth, or MACI as they are called, is an independent, nonpartisan office of the Manitoba Legislative Assembly. It represents the rights, interests, and viewpoints of children, youth, and youth adults throughout Manitoba who are receiving or are entitled to receive public services. And that includes child and family, adoption, disability, mental health, addictions, education, victim supports, or youth justice. The office does this by advocating directly with children and youth, or on their behalf with caregivers and other stakeholders. Advocacy also involves reviewing public services after the death of any young person, any young Manitoban, when that person or their family was involved with a reviewable service as defined in the Advocate for Children and Youth Act. Additionally, the Manitoba Advocate is empowered to, under the provincial law, to make recommendations to government and other public bodies. It conducts child-centered research, it disseminates its findings, and educates the public on children's rights and other matters under the Advocate for Children and Youth Act. So it does a phenomenal amount of work for Manitoba youth. And obviously everybody in this House will know that those powers were extended just a couple of years back when it included all of these other reviewable bodies. And so we know that the mandate for MACI has increased and that their work has increased. And they've done some pretty phenomenal work. I just want to concentrate or offer a little bit of commentary on a couple of them. You know, we've had the pleasure of participating in, well, in the last couple of years, certainly over Zoom calls, when MACI was about to release some really critical and important research and reports that they did. I'll talk about a couple of them, Deputy Speaker. One of them, back in November of 2021, MACI released the Manitoba Advocate's investigation into suicide, homicide deaths of 45 boys reveal common risks, risk factors, which include poverty and discrimination. And so what that report did, you know, the Advocate made 4 recommendations to address systemic inequities experienced particularly by First Nation children, youth, and communities. And so that investigation included looking at the lives of 45 boys who died from either suicide or homicide between the years of 2019 and 2018, that those boys had passed, and that MACI had done this report and this research. And what I really appreciate about MACI, what I really honor about the work that MACI does, is that they often work with the guidance and expertise and wisdom of elders that they have in the communities. And they also have a council. It's called the MACI's Knowledge Keeper and Elders Council. And so I think that that's pretty phenomenal that MACI has been able to include those knowledge keepers and those individuals that hold the wisdom, not only for, Indigenous youth or Indigenous communities, but really for all of us. I think that we can agree that elders play a significant role in all of our lives. And so I like that Macy does that. And they were guided, this report was guided by the guidance of these elders. And together they worked with Dr. Marlon Bennett. I don't know if folks know Dr. Bennett. I've known Dr. Bennett since we were in university together. And she is pretty incredible. She is incredibly brilliant. She has wrote so many reports, particularly with, within the systems and particularly concentrating on children or the exploitation of Indigenous women and girls. And so they worked with Dr. Marlon Bennett, who's from the University of Manitoba, on this report. And then what they did here was they also held a digital storytelling workshop with 2 First Nation boys, and they created a music video where the boys reflect on their lived experiences. And so helping to inform this report. And why is this report and the way that Macy executed this report, why is it important? Because this report should help inform the way that governments respond to systemic issues of racism and poverty and discrimination for Indigenous boys. And so that's why this report, which is just one report, is so important. And I just want to read for the record something that the acting Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth said on the release of this. As we created, and I quote, "As we created this report, elders spoke to us about the importance of recovering what has been lost, the traditions and ceremonies that connect young boys to their grandparents and support their identity development, including storytelling. In this special report and video, the Government of Manitoba has an opportunity to listen to the voices of young men and their families. Together, we must honor the lives lost by investing in a future where boys, and First Nation boys in particular, have equal opportunities to grow and thrive," end quote, Deputy Speaker. I think that is, again, why Macy is so important, because it offers the government of the day the opportunity to learn the lessons of youth who passed, right, who died of suicide or died of murder, so that their lives were not just for nothing, that their lives mattered. I think that's something that a lot of folks kind of miss on these things, is particularly the way that Indigenous youth, and in particular, well, all Indigenous youth, but Indigenous boys and Indigenous girls are socially constructed in very different ways. Indigenous boys have been socially constructed as, gangsters, as criminals. I mean, I think all of us remember several years back when the Premier, the former Premier, Brian Pallister, tried to construct all young Indigenous men as criminals. And there are very real consequences to that social construction. When we construct Indigenous male youth as inherently criminal, or as inherently bad, or as inherently not worthy of trust, or inherently unlovable, it creates the conditions in which young Indigenous boys and young Indigenous men take their lives and or are murdered. And so, when we look at Bill 26, and we look at the importance of Bill 26, it's important that we have officers of the Assembly appointed to these bodies that are truly independent, so that we don't have, and as the minister said earlier, recommendations from the subcommittee coming and the cabinet saying, yay or nay, that they don't like the individual because the individual potentially is going to be offering too much criticism of the government. And so, I would agree with the government House Leader or the Minister of Justice that it's important to have officers wholly independent. And again, I think one of a good way to illustrate that is the reports from Macy. I do also just want to put on the record a little bit in respect to the work that the Independent Office of the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth in this report put on there. The aggregate investigation revealed common and modification risk factors for the young men who died, 78% of whom were identified as First Nation youth and 49% of whom lived in northern Manitoba. Risk factors included living in poverty, experiencing racism and discrimination, witnessing caregiver substance use, and independent partner violence between adults, involvement in the justice system, poor attendance in school, and problematic substance use. Gang involvement was also a commonality among many of the young men who died of homicide. So, I think it's important to put these words on the record because my concern is that since some of us on this side of the House had that meeting with Macy, we haven't seen any press releases or any programs coming out from the government that I see that is tackling the increased risk of Indigenous youth to suicide and homicide. We haven't seen any of that. And so, it's important that these officers are independent and these offices are independent. But what I would put on the record is that it's one thing to be independent, but then for a government not to do anything, I think is problematic. And so this is a good start, but like I said, in the last, 6 years or 7 years, I don't even know how long it's been here, but, we haven't really seen much commitment or action from the government on any of these files, and this is just one of them. So I want to just put on the record the 4 points here, the recommendations for the Government of Manitoba, and they were: 1, to coordinate between government and child and family services authorities, to include evidence-based and culturally safe supports for parents with substance use disorders in their homes with the goal of reducing apprehensions. 2, continue work on an Indigenous inclusion strategy that includes culturally appropriate school engagement initiatives tailored to Indigenous boys to help close the achievement gap and increase high school completion rates. 3, demonstrate the development or continuation of sustainable initiatives in anti-racist education for all students, administrators, teachers, and support staff. And 4, collaborate with the Government of Canada and consult with Manitoba communities to update, fund, and implement a provincial youth gang prevention strategy. So that's one of the reports that in the last 2 years Macy has undertaken. And again, I would suggest that that report was done in the spirit in which Macy operates, which is as an independent body. And I would suggest will become more independent in respect of the appointment of its advocate. So another report that we sat in on with the child's advocate, the acting child advocate, was in June of 2021, so just last June. And that report that they released was it was a report on Manitoba Justice's progress on the use of solitary confinement and segregation. And again, during that time, Macy called and renewed its call for a system change. And that was born out of many different reports, not the least Nelson Mandela, a report coming from that on the use of solitary confinement, particularly for children. And so I think that this is a really important report to put on the record here in the House because, again, we're talking about children and using what can be forms of torture, really. The use of solitary confinement can be a form of torture for children. So it's, yes, Bill 26, creates the process whereby appointing assembly officers to be more independent, which again is fine. But when you appoint officers of the assembly to be independent, but you actually don't adhere to any of the work or the recommendations that they're bringing forward, I think is problematic. Bill 26 could have actually gone even further. Bill 26 could have, embedded language that, the government has a responsibility to respond to the reports that all of the agencies or all of the independent offices bring forward, including Macy. They could have strengthened Bill 26 by doing that. And so it's important to put on the record, particularly for everybody in the House here, what is the call for Macy. And in 2019, a special report made 6 recommendations calling on the Manitoba government and Manitoba Justice to end the use of segregation for over 24 consecutive hours and work with other government departments to enhance therapeutic alternatives to support the rehabilitation and reintegration of young people in custody. And so, again, when I go back to, yes, Bill 2026 is, trying to create an infrastructure whereby the appointment of officers are more independent. But since the 2019 publication, Macy has been monitoring the government's process or progress by analyzing monthly data and working with departmental officials on strategies to move each of the recommendations closer to completion. And so in June of 2021, to date, only one of their 6 recommendations, which was increasing oversight of pepper spray use, had been deemed fully compliant by Macy. So the report came out in 2019, and by June of 2021, only one of the 6 recommendations had been fulfilled. There's only 6 recommendations. It's not like it was 300 recommendations and they only got 1. So again, Deputy Speaker, I want to go back to the fact that, and I said this yesterday or today, no, a couple of days ago, whatever, I don't know. The government does, tries to bring forward, bills or resolutions or whatever it may be to act like they're doing something. But at the end of the day, in all reality, the government is doing the bare minimum. And so, yes, Bill 26 is fine, and it's good to move forward in respect of, independent officers and giving that responsibility to LAMC and then ultimately to this body here, to this room here. That's fine. But here's Macy, one of the independent offices of the Assembly, who has brought forward, again, recommendations there, only 6 recommendations here, and there's no action. And I think what's frustrating is that and why I'm concentrating my comments on Macy is because we're talking about children. We're talking about the most vulnerable of Manitobans, which is children. And if you can't get the government to move on following through on all of the recommendations in respect of vulnerable children, what can you get the government to move on? the government is doing the bare minimum in respect of Manitoba children who are most at risk. So again, the government had an opportunity to strengthen Bill 26, to make themselves more accountable to the reports that come out. Back in June, when the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth, they released the special report, and it provides insights into the province's ongoing use of solitary confinement and segregation in youth custody facilities. And the purpose of their report was to update and amplify the voices of youth who continue to experience segregation and solitary confinement in Manitoba youth custody facilities, and also the voices of justice personnel who say they need more tools to manage children and youth who enter custody already carrying emotional trauma and other complex needs. I'll share with the House in the couple of minutes that I have left. Several months ago, I had the opportunity. I've been to MYC, Manitoba Youth Center, many times over the years. I cannot even count how many times I've been there. I went there, 20 years ago. I used to be on an Indigenous women's drum group. We had a big drum. We were called Daughters of the Dream Drum. And we were asked to go and sing on our drum at the MYC, Manitoba Youth Center. And every single time that I have an opportunity to go there, which again included just a couple of months ago, I was there. And the youth that are currently housed at MYC are, contrary to the way that they would be constructed, are just babies. Like they're just babies who have so much trauma, who have so much hurt, who have experienced things that most people will never experience. And so when you look at the recommendation from Macy to end segregation more than 24 hours, I don't understand why the government hasn't moved on that. I know that I have. I'm currently, I have a bill that's just getting finished that I will introduce that would, take the advice of the Manitoba Advocate and every other professional and expert who says solitary confinement for children is not good. Solitary confinement and segregation for children is a form of torture. And, solitary confinement and segregation that's used predominantly against Indigenous children is a violation of Indigenous children's rights in this province. And so, I'm just a lowly, opposition MLA, and I'm trying to do the best that I can to listen to the experts that Macy brought together and to honor the report and the recommendations that came forward from youth and from personnel. I'm just a lowly opposition MLA, but I'm bringing forward legislation to stop that. I don't know why the government hasn't acted on that. So, it's fine and dandy to stand up in this House and say that we're going to, with Bill 26, create more of an independence within, the Assembly offices or officers. That's fine. That's fine and dandy. We all want that. But government has a responsibility to do more. Government has a responsibility to actually read the reports that these offices are producing. And in particular, if you're only going to read one, which obviously you're in government, you should be reading all of them. But if you're only going to be reading one, you should be reading the Advocate for Children and Youth. And you should be reading the reports that they brought forward. I can't go through all of them, Deputy Speaker. I wish I had 4 more hours to speak on this. In March of 2021, they also released Bridging the Gaps, Achieving Substantive Equality for Children with Disabilities in Manitoba. In December of 2021, they released their annual government compliance report. which acts as a report card summarizing the progress made by the province toward the intent of the advocates' 51 recommendations made between 2018 and 2020. Let me put this on the record, Deputy Speaker. I know that I've said it many times. Bill 26 could have been strengthened by having some form of accountability on the part of the government. And here's why. This year's compliance report, Kids Can't Keep Waiting, outlines individual assessments for each of Macy's recommendations, as well as trends observed in compliance by special reports. Only 8%, or 4 of 51 recommendations for service improvements, have been fully implemented. 4 out of 51. Less than half, 43% of the recommendations, have demonstrated substantive actions towards implementation. Manitoba Education is the department with the highest compliance levels at an overall compliance rate of 75% compared to 42% the previous year. Manitoba Health and Seniors Care continues to have the lowest average compliance rating at 25%. This rating can largely be attributed to a lack of action reported towards addressing recommendations to prevent sleep-related infant deaths. Manitoba Justice has an average compliance rate of just 45%, while Manitoba Families has a 43% compliance rate. These are not great numbers. These show a lack of action, a lack of commitment, a lack of care, a lack of concern, a lack of knowledge on the part of the government, again, towards Manitoba children who are some of the most at-risk children. This is not a good record. And members opposite in the PC caucus, and I've said this many times in the last 6-7 years, whatever it is, each and every one of those members are complicit in not following through or getting in compliance with any of the recommendations. So each and every one of them is responsible. We could have done more with Bill 26.
The member's time has expired. The honourable member for Portage-La Prairie.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to put a few words on the record regarding Bill 26, and I'd like to thank the minister for all the work that I know that he and his staff have put into this to review all of the facts and compare other jurisdictions. I know that there's always more work that can be done, and we had some of that discussion during the question period about what other Commonwealth nations do in regards to this. But I think we all recognize how important it is to have these independent officers of the legislature, and that there is a clear and obviously accountable process, and that the results of their recommendations come forward to the legislature in a way that we all can appreciate and work with them. I know that many of us over the years, and I know that the member for St. John's went into some detail of her interaction with the Children's Advocate, and a number of us have had interactions with the Children's Advocate on casework, and also by going to see and meet with them, and also when they come to report to committee. And we all respect the work that they do. I think it's very important that that is a very transparent process as much as is possible, because we know that there are probably going to be times when some of the recommendations aren't popular with government, whether it's this government or previous governments, and but we need to hear what needs to be said and begin to build on that. And if you have to have the right people in the right position, and I think that very much this is what this bill is all about, is making sure we get the right people in the right way and the right jobs at the right time. Same with the Auditor General. Of course, we all know that the Auditor General's report is very important to the finance side of how we operate here in Manitoba. He doesn't always agree with the Finance Minister. That is fair judgment, and I know the Finance Minister takes into consideration with great respect what has come from the Auditor General's report, and certainly follows with great diligence what can be done in regards to dealing with the issues. Chief Electoral Officer, I think we've all had some interaction with during the election campaigns. They are a very important office, and we certainly need to have in place the right people there, and a good working relationship is important. All 57 MLAs at one time or the other, in fact, all candidates have interaction with the Chief Electoral Officer, and it's important that that continue. And we all report regularly to the Information and Privacy Adjudicator with what our information and our personal assets are each session, and I think it's important that you have a good working relationship and understand what they're looking for and what you have to report in regards to that. And of course, every day we deal with in the House here, we deal with the Clerk of the Assembly. We appreciate what she has to say and what she has to know, because the range of knowledge that she has is phenomenal. I'm not sure how well that this House would operate without her good advice, and we're always learning something from her, and I think it's important that process, as the appointment of such an important person, let the record show she seems to be embarrassed by this, but it's the truth. We certainly appreciate the great work that she does, and it makes our lives easier, and I think all Manitobans benefit from her. Other officers, of course, of the Assembly, we appreciate what you contribute as well. And we are always learning in this House. It seems learning the process of governance is never done. There are so many precedents that I don't know how you begin to sort them all out on some occasions. I know I'm certainly learning a great deal every day moving forward. Did want to comment briefly on the lobbyist registrar, which we haven't done too much with here in Manitoba. I had the pleasure of being involved with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture when the federal government went through the lobby register process. It was very complex to be registered. We were amongst the first through that process. I think it's refined and working a little better now. But at that point in time, we had to register as lobbyists federally to speak to ministers or even to MPs in Ottawa, and we had to do the reporting, not them, which was sort of, in my mind, a backwards way of doing it. And at that particular point, they were taking a very broad analysis of what constituted a lobbyist at that point in time, and if you had a conflict from their point of view. And of course, in those days, to be involved with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, you had to be a farmer somewhere in some province, and depending on your appointments and election, whether or not you had to be a lobbyist. And the federal government took the view that if you were a farmer, you couldn't be a lobbyist because you benefited from your lobby. And it took us several years to work through that definition and finally sort it to a level where it was workable and that we could actually continue doing what we needed to do, which was just to meet on a regular basis and explain our case to the various federal officials. I hope that we can work a more rational approach here in Manitoba, but I do think it's important that lobbyists do report who they see, when they see, and I think it's also important that on the other side that ministers are transparent on this. The ombudsman process, and many of us have dealt with the ombudsman because of freedom of information requests. I know when I was critic for family services, we had at any time literally dozens of requests into the Department for Freedom of Information requests, and we had to deal regularly with the ombudsman because In those days, we were averaging more than 6 months wait for any freedom of information request, and sometimes quite a lot more. And we would often have to repeat them because we would be told no such information existed, and we knew, in fact, it did. And so we would have to refile and refile on these things to eventually get the information. And they were quite helpful in the process, and we were able to work with them in a very positive manner. And just to mention in passing, the Ethics Commissioner, which I think is important that we all be perceived and in fact be ethical in our behavior in this House. I think it's very important. I think that is something that everybody looks to us to do, and I think it's very important moving into the future. So with those few remarks, I certainly support this bill, and I would encourage all members in the House. It may not be absolutely perfect, but I think it's a move in the right direction and a very positive step forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Happy to take a few minutes today to speak on Bill 26, the Officers of the Assembly Act. This bill makes a few changes into the appointment of several officers and officials and in terms of the roles that they play, and seeks to increase the independence of the appointments of those positions. Bill 26 will allow new appointments of independent officers to be made through a resolution of this House in the Legislative Assembly.
Order, please. We can keep chatter to a respectable level. That would be helpful. The honourable member for St. Vital.
I appreciate that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I was saying, Bill 26 will allow new appointments of independent officers to be made through a resolution of this House here in the Legislative Assembly rather than through the Executive Council. And this would provide more opportunity to ensure that there is a consensus-based decision. And having that type of decision and that type of model would allow there to be greater independence in the appointments of those positions. Additionally, these amendments proposed in this bill, in Bill 26, will have the appointment of a new clerk of the legislature now follow that same process of requiring a resolution of the Assembly after LAMC has made a recommendation. Those independent officers will also be able to choose their own deputy to fill in during their absence. Now, our independent officers have done such tremendous work in Manitoba, from producing so many of our special reports on child welfare, to auditing parts of government COVID response, to holding government accountable to freedom of information, to conducting democratic elections, and ensuring members follow conflict of interest laws. Our officers work hard every day on behalf of Manitobans, and I want to thank them for that hard work. When we thank them, we're talking about specifically the officers of the Advocate for Children and Youth, the Auditor General, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Clerk of the Assembly, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, which, as we know, is to be replaced by the Ethics Commissioner, the Information and Privacy Adjudicator, the Ombudsman, the registrar appointed under the Lobbies Registration Act. Those, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, are some very important and critical roles where independence is not just a suggestion, but it's really something that's at the heart of and critical to those roles to be able to provide independent decisions when it comes to conflict of interest, to be able to provide independence when it comes to our election system. Those are also so important, not just to all of us in this House, who it often directly affects, but really to all Manitobans who rely on a good working government each and every day. And so we are excited about debating today a bill that proposes to increase independence in these important roles that Manitobans rely on. Now, I want to take a few minutes to thank those people in those roles and talk a little bit about what some of those roles are and how some of those roles affect Manitobans and what they do for Manitobans, because not everyone in our province is aware of these roles, let alone how important they are, let alone why it's important for those roles to have increased independence. Let me begin, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the Advocate for Children and Youth. Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth is an independent office of the Manitoba Legislative Assembly. The Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth is empowered by legislation to advise children, youth, and young adults of their rights and their services which should be available to them. Because as I'm sure, I have no doubt that you're well aware, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are many things in our province, many services available in our province, many rights that are available to people in our province that they may not be aware of. And having an advocate able to explain and help provide access to services is especially important. And I think it's even more important for the vulnerable people or the people who may not have complete access or information. I think children and youth fit into that category. Those young people who are looking for help many times, looking to access a service, and perhaps sometimes looking to access that service or that help in a time of great stress, in a time of great need. And having an advocate work on their behalf is critically important. We want to make sure that that advocate is able to fulfill their job in the most independent way possible so that they can provide the best advocacy role for children and youth. Now, the advocate also has the responsibility to raise issues with government on behalf of the province's children and to advise the government on issues and areas of concern. This is exactly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, why the independence is so important. If they're feeling like they have some conflict of interest or some other areas where they might have their interests lie on one side or the other, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they might make advocacy difficult for them. It might make their role for raising issues with the government a challenge. And so the more independence we can add to these positions, and in this case with Bill 26 through the appointment of these positions, only goes to strengthen their roles and goes to strengthen the advocacy that children and youth and young people can have in Manitoba. The Advocate for Children and Youth also conduct research on issues affecting Manitoba's young people. While doing that research, they monitor, they analyze, and they publicly report on the compliance of public systems and services and service providers with those recommendations. And part of that I think is the most valuable
is the part about publicly reporting them. As they're reported publicly, as you're able to shine a light on some of these issues that affect Manitoba's youth and young people, you're able to then see how those issues can be resolved and what role the province of Manitoba can play in solving those issues. We know that our province isn't perfect. We know that one of the ways to solve issues that people are facing in Manitoba is by highlighting them, by drawing people's attention to them, and calling Manitobans, especially those in this chamber, to action to work at solving some of these issues, especially for people in Manitoba, such as children and youth, who might be more vulnerable than other Manitobans. So we call not only today to thank people who work for the advocacy of children and youth, but we quite frankly just call on all Manitobans to do more to help children and youth. I think that can be done in the provincial level by adding supports for youth services, after-school programs, more provincial supports for K-12 education, for healthy programs for students, for initiatives such as available menstrual products, for initiatives like healthy eating campaigns and food nutrition programs. These are all things that would help students, help young people, and help youth. And these are the sort of things that we want to advocate for because we know how important young people are in our province. And so this role of the advocate for children and youth is just one of the roles that's affected by the change of this bill. Another role that's affected by the change is the Auditor General, who has Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't imagine you've ever held the role of Auditor General, but I could only imagine that it would be difficult, not just for you, but for anyone to hold that role. And so I want to put a special emphasis on the good work that the Auditor General and the good role that is in our province. Obviously, the Auditor General Act establishes the Auditor General as an officer of the Manitoba Legislative Assembly to provide the Assembly with independent information, advice, and assurance. Their office examines and reports on how well the government accounts for the resources entrusted to it and how well it manages its operations. As the legislative auditor, the Auditor General provides the Legislative Assembly the Auditor General provides the Legislative Assembly with financial statements and audits and project audits. Now, this is important when we're taking on such a large financial responsibility as the province of Manitoba does, to have a clear process of independence for the Auditor General, so that the Auditor General has the ability to independently and accurately provide those audits on the financial accounts of the province of Manitoba. The Auditor General examines and audits the financial statements included in the province's public accounts and any other statements the Minister of Finance presents for audit. As well, as we know, the Auditor General can examine the operations of any government organization or the use of public money by any recipient of that money. It's called project audits. So, supported by staff of more than 55 individuals, the Auditor General serves the Legislative Assembly, and in turn, it serves all Manitobans. And I think it's clear that we've seen over the history of our province the importance of that role of Auditor General. We can look at the various reports the Auditor General has put out and published, not just in recent years, but going back many, many decades, and how that's impacted people of Manitoba and the operations of government. And having that clear delineation, that clear separation between the operation of the Auditor General, the independence of that role, and the operation of this House and members is important, because we want to be able to have and trust in the Auditor General, trust in a report that's being brought forward by the Auditor General, because in many cases it calls out many of the important decisions and decision makers in our province. So we hope
that role can be strengthened and the independence of that role can be strengthened. And we see some of that, a portion of that being brought forward and steps toward increasing that independence being brought forward in Bill 26. As the government operations become increasingly complex, the Auditor General's role has become increasingly important to investigate matters that are in the best interests of Manitobans. This government needs to ensure...
Order, please. Members are not meant to be having phone calls in the chamber or video calls, and I just remind all members of that rule. If you do need to take a call, there's places to do so just in the anterooms. The Honourable Member for St. Vital.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'll just continue with my remarks there regarding the Auditor General. So the Auditor General, his office needs to be properly resourced. The government needs to ensure that it is properly resourced so that it can do its job effectively. As I mentioned, there are 55 staff who work as part of that team. And they need to make sure that they have the proper resources to do their job effectively. This government got a qualified opinion from the Auditor General, which is why last year they brought in and introduced a bill to change the Workers' Compensation Board. And it's reports like this, it's opinions like this, it is the work done by the Auditor General in that office that really is what we rely on for making better laws, which make the people in Manitoba understand that we have a responsive system in this province which can respond to their needs. You know, oftentimes, you know, I know as a private citizen before elected, I always wondered why things often took so long in government to change and be responsive to the needs of the citizens of the province. And, you know, understanding that these things take time, but also seeing the work done by good offices like the Auditor General to call out when the government needs to make a change and when the government needs to act and act more correctly in the favor of workers and employees in our province, such as the Workers' Compensation Board. I also want to touch on another important role affected by this bill, which is the Chief Electoral Officer. And we all can clearly see, especially those in this room who have been elected, can clearly see and know the importance of the Chief Electoral Officer and why independence in this position is key. As many people in this room, I'm sure, and I hope all members, can't say I've committed to memory the number with which every member in this chamber won their seat by, but I'm sure some were large wins. I'm sure some were, you know, good size wins, medium wins. Some, I'm sure, were very, very close, razor thin. And it's those officials who work to run our elections properly that give us the confidence, give us as Manitobans the confidence in those close decisions. And when we see a result that comes down to, 1%, 49 to 50, a really neck and neck race, between two candidates vying for an elected office, we want to have that confidence in that, how that election took place and the result of that election. And so by strengthening the independence of the officer, the Chief Electoral Officer, the hope is, and my hope is that it will only add to the confidence that Manitobans have in the election results as we move forward in our province. It's clear that the role the Chief Electoral Officer plays administers provincial elections to ensure that they are fair, to ensure that they are free of political interference and influence. And that's all set out in the Elections Act and the Elections Financing Act. Of course, reporting to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba, the CEO must be and must remain nonpartisan and may not vote in an election. That officer of the office of the Chief Electoral Officer, that's, as we know commonly, Elections Manitoba, must always be ready to conduct elections, by-elections, and referenda. And in that process of being ready, you must understand the amount of work that it takes to get election ready. I know we all in this chamber know what it takes to get an election ready in terms of a candidate and a campaign, but we might not always understand what that means to get election ready in terms of running an election from the point of view of a chief electoral officer. And so I thank the chief electoral officer for the good work that they do, and all the staff who work in that office, and all the staff and volunteers who come up and work and help out during election time. Like so many of our campaigns, and so many of us, we ramp up in the lead up to an election, and we ramp up in staffing and in the efforts that we do to prepare for an election. And I know Elections Manitoba does the same. They ramp up in what they do. And so all those who were working, all year round to prepare and make sure that Manitoba is election ready, and to all those who are part of that team, who come on board in the lead up to and during an election, I thank you. I can even think of times when, during my time as a candidate, going door to door and knocking and meeting residents in my community, where I have, coincidentally bumped into people who are trying to enumerate citizens in our province and residents in my area. And seeing the good work firsthand, up close, face to face with people who are working with Elections Manitoba really heartens and strengthens my confidence in the system, the electoral system and the electoral process that we have. And so it's pleasing to know that we're trying to take steps through Bill 26 to even further strengthen the independence of that role and thus strengthen the electoral system, which we all rely on in Manitoba. Of course, the office of the Chief Electoral Officer remains ready to go into election mode. And Election Manitoba enables all qualified Manitobans to vote in provincial elections. They do this in several ways which are beneficial, and I think one of the ways that I think all Manitobans know is by promoting opportunities to vote and educating voters about the electoral process. And those are, I think, standards and initiatives within Election Manitoba, which benefits all of us in the province. The next role that I want to highlight as a part of this bill, which I want to thank for their hard work, and is the clerk of the Assembly. And I know that we have an amazing clerk here who is always a wealth of resource for us in the Legislative Assembly, and is a permanent employee of the Legislature. The role, as we know, is responsible for the Legislative Assembly through the Speaker, for maintaining the records of the Assembly, and for the custody of legislative documents. These documents, such as order papers, votes, proceedings, debates, things in Hansard, are the lifeblood, the living daily documents that we rely on to organize our debate, to prepare ourselves for a question period, for bill debate, for committee hearings, and for votes. And all these documents, all this work that we do gets supported, and gets led, and gets cared for by the amazing team of clerks that we had, headed by the clerk of our Assembly. And so I want to thank our head clerk, our clerk, for the good work that she does, and all the people who support her team, because that's an invaluable role that we as legislators cannot take for granted and must appreciate for what it is, for what it means to us, and for how it allows us to do our jobs better in representing the views, opinions of our residents, our constituents, and how it allows us to advocate for their best interests in this House to the best of our abilities. And so I thank our clerk for the amazing job that she does. Of course, next, we cannot forget about our Conflict of Interest Commissioner, as I'm sure that we have all in this chamber had the opportunity at one point or the other to get in touch with making sure that we ought to ensure that we have no conflicts of interest. I know that we, are required to fill out documentation at the start of a session to declare what any conflicts that we have. And I know that we all take that very seriously. And I know that it's something that we should, if there's a failure in judgment, perhaps you forget to file something on a report, perhaps it's overlooked by the elections commissioner, by the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, that those issues are dealt with seriously, and that the best effort is made by all members to right a wrong or an error in judgment. And I think that most would agree that the majority of public office holders are decent or hardworking individuals, that they do their best to serve the public as they understand it. And so the conflict of interest legislation is largely intended to assist elected representatives by providing an objective understanding against which they can gauge their actions and satisfy themselves with the public that they are acting appropriately. And that's the call that the Conflict of Interest Commissioner faces. That's the call that they put on all of us elected representatives. That we can actually go back to the public and say, am I acting appropriately? And I think we can all here today think of examples where perhaps people didn't act appropriately or forgot things that should have been mentioned on conflict of interest documents. But I won't go into that right now, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I won't go into that right now. I'll just simply say that that's an important role. And having independence in that role is clearly important. It's clearly important. And having even more autonomy in that role is something that we should all value as elected officials, giving that commissioner the ability to take on instances where elected officials have failed in their conflict of interest documentation is important and should be looked at. And I understand that there may be other legislation to deal with that area that we might debate at other dates. But I think to say right now that it's important that we have that, that we note the importance of that role being independent from this chamber. And as we move on, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to just highlight some of the conversation that we had during the time of our question period with the minister in regards to this bill. And the question period was pretty, I think the minister was able to handle and answer many questions. I know there were some pieces that he was taking away in terms of getting back to us, before committee hearings or at other points in time, and that's understandable. I do want the minister to clearly understand and take to heart our questions around whether this is the best way to provide independence in some of these roles, and see and endeavor to see if there are other ways to increase independence in these roles even further. Looking perhaps at other jurisdictions and other models that might exist even outside of Canada, and other Westminster models where they might have other arrangements to even further strengthen the independence of these roles and allow for a better political system in our province. I also wanted to highlight in my questions to the minister about what happens, as this bill calls for a resolution to name and appoint officers in this role. What happens, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when this House is not sitting? As we know, Our House doesn't sit 24/7, 365. You know, there's some point in the year where we are on recess for one reason or the other. And during that time, there might be a need to have an official with Elections Manitoba appointed, or needs with the ombudsman, someone at the role in the ombudsman appointed, or the role as conflict of interest commissioner appointed, or advocate for children appointed. And if those appointments come up, the timing of those appointments come up, when the House is not sitting, I would hate for those roles to sit vacant or that work to not get done as well as it could if this House is not sitting and we're not able to provide a resolution to appoint a person in that role. And so I brought that concern up to the minister for him to investigate to see if there is a way for us to mitigate that concern. And perhaps one option is for us to have an all-party committee where we can, each independently raise a voice and say there's a clear need, or urgent need, a vacant need in this vacancy in this position, and we ought to call the House back, get to the work of debating and appointing a role in a person in this role, so that Manitobans don't suffer. And Manitobans, at the end of the day, are the ones who we are working for in this chamber. And so as we move forward with Bill 26, I'd like to close by saying that everything and every role here that's affected by Bill 26 works for the best interests of Manitobans. I know on our side of the House, we work every day for the best interests of Manitobans, and we work to strengthen the independence of those roles so that they can work, again, to better the lives of all Manitobans.
Members' time has expired. The honourable member for River Heights.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to talk just for a few minutes about Bill 26, which deals with the officers of the Legislative Assembly. This bill shifts the responsibility from the Cabinet, from the Clerk of the Privy, from the Privy Council to the Legislative Assembly, where it more properly resides, for making the appointment and the appointment on the recommendation of the Standing Committee of the Assembly on Legislative Affairs. This is a positive step. It enhances the sense of independence of the officers of the Assembly from the government of the day, and the ability of these officers to respond to and be responsible to the Legislative Assembly. This positive step is associated with a few additional changes and amendments in procedures. I note, for example, that the term of office for the Chief Electoral Officer is from the date of appointment until 12 months after the date of the return of the last writ for the second general election for which the Chief Electoral Officer is responsible. Now, there could potentially be a problem if there's a minority government and there may be an election occurring sometime around the time of a year after the last writ for the second general election. Thus, there could be some concerns. However, there is the ability for the person who's the Chief Electoral Officer to be reappointed in such circumstances, and so that should resolve that issue. The legislation doesn't put a limit on the number of times that the Chief Electoral Officer can be reappointed. Often in circumstances like this, There is a limit on the number of reappointments. I don't know what the legislation is in other provinces. It would be interesting to look at. But in general, this is legislation which we support, making sure that the officers of the Assembly respond to the Assembly and have greater independence of the government. And so with those few words, I look forward to this going to committee and then to becoming legislation in due course. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kiiwetinoong.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to share a few things about Bill 26, the Officers of the Assembly Act. A number of pieces of legislation that come before this House are meant and well intended to do better, to streamline, to increase accountability, transparency. And there's aspects of Bill 26 that do those things, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This bill amends various acts with respect to the appointments of the officers of the Assembly, the Advocate for Children and Youth, the Auditor General, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Clerk of the Assembly, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, I guess soon to be replaced by the Ethics Commissioner, the Information and Privacy Adjudicator, the Ombudsman, the Registrar appointed under the Lobbyist Registration Act. Currently, as it sits now, these officers are appointed by the Lieutenant Governor in Council on the recommendation of a committee in the Assembly. As a result of the amendments, the officers, other than the clerk, are appointed by the Assembly on the recommendation of the Standing Committee on Legislative Affairs. The clerk's appointment is on the recommendation of the Legislative Assembly Management Commission. The current officers of the Assembly and their deputies continue in office until on the coming into the force of the Act. And the amendments are made to the Legislative Assembly Management Commission Act and 5 other acts under this structure and the purpose of this bill. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the basis of these offices and these officers is to have not just the perception of independence, of nonpartisanship, of trust, of fairness, but they need to truly have those qualities and those attributes. And this bill steps towards being able to do that. There's obviously a lot of different ways. If we had an all-party committee to truly go through some of these bills and bring all those ideas to the table, there would be a lot more constructive criticism, a lot more great ideas to be able to strengthen Bill 26, to be able to give it, and we've used that word many times, more bite, more effectiveness. But ultimately, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's about creating that independence of these offices, that nonpartisanship, that trust. Because Manitobans, not just MLAs here in the chamber, on both sides, all sides of this House, but Manitobans in general have to be able to trust the process of which government is held to account, of which government functions, and the officers that make that function or play a role in that function of government. So it's very important that they be able to have that trust and that faith. And by them doing this is something they can kind of work towards, and to be able to say, well, yes, these offices, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Clerk's Office, the Ombudsman's Office, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, I truly have faith that those organizations are now nonpartisan, that those organizations are truly not going to be influenced, whether it be by government or whether it be by opposition or other members of the chamber or members just in large, that they truly have an independence to them. While we're very supportive of maintaining and furthering the independent nature of the Assembly, it's very important that these positions maintain that nonpartisanship, including their appointments, and being able to kind of have government not say or even the perception of being able to say we influenced a decision that was made within those officers of the Assembly, within the Conflict of Interest, Attorney General, and those kind of things, and we have that independence. Not just to say we have it, but actually have that independence in that structure. independence is a key thing to maintain that trust from government and maintain that trust of Manitobans. And albeit, I mean, there's, you know, a number of politicians, MLAs elected, whether it be whichever party may stand from, to represent their constituents, to represent the Manitobans here in the chamber. But there's that independence that needs to be maintained. And it goes across all of those bodies and all of those officers. The Advocate for Children and Youth, for example, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's an independent office of the Manitoba Legislative Assembly. The Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth is empowered by legislation to advise children, youth, and young adults of their rights and services which should be available to them. And I'm sure every member of this chamber has had a constituent or a family or a group of individuals or an organization that has come forward with a concern when it comes time to the advocacy for children and youth in your riding, in your family, in wherever it may be across Manitoba. And those young voices need to be heard, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it's a very imperative that those young voices have that strong advocacy outside of influence of government, outside of influence of organizations or people in a position of power. So the Advocate for Children and Youth does that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They also have the responsibility to raise the issues with the government on behalf of the province's children and to advise the government on issues of areas and concerns. But it has to be something that the government actually takes and uses those questions and those concerns to develop and draft policy to better the lives of children and youth here in Manitoba. Not just create this organization and have this body created to be able to say, well, we have it there, we've checked that box, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It has to actually have that ability and that organization. These are real concerns. It's going to help develop and draft that policy, and we want to see that policy implemented because it is the best thing for children and youth here in Manitoba. So it can't just be kind of a figurehead organization, a figurehead body. So those organizations have to be able to bring forth their concerns and bring forth their policy developments and their suggestions and have them taken and drafted and developed to actually come out with a great idea. And let's take all those good ideas and come out with something great, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Advocate for Children and Youth, they also conduct research on issues affecting Manitoba's young people. They monitor, they analyze, and they publicly report on the compliance of public systems and service providers with recommendations the Advocate for Children and Youth makes for improving services for young people in Manitoba. And that just reinforces the comments I just made, Mr. Deputy Speaker, about when the organization and the Advocacy Office brings forth those ideas, they have to be developed, they have to be nurtured, and they have to be put into real world applications. Not just, like I said, not just a box to check to say, yes, we've consulted with, we've taken the report from the Advocacy Office. Let's actually look at those suggestions, look at those recommendations, and let's move that into real policy development and say this is truly what we want to do. Just a few months ago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Manitoba Advocates said the work to implement dozens of recommendations to protect the province's youngest people has ground to a near halt. And that's just reaffirms the comments I'm making about being able to, let's take those recommendations, let's take those suggestions, let's take those ideas and implement them into real world situations. Not just check the box, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but actually go and do that work, because those recommendations are coming from somewhere. Nobody's just sitting around a table and drafting recommendations out of nowhere, out of thin air. They come from real world situations, and real situations of young people here in Manitoba, and situations that they've had to live through, they've had to endure. So why not take those suggestions and take those situations that have developed, and there's a number of them, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm sure every member across this whole chamber doesn't know every situation, doesn't know every example, but we've all heard some, and we've all heard different versions of it. We've all heard different aspects. Maybe somebody's heard something I've never heard before and vice versa. And we need to be able to take those situations and bring those to the Advocacy Office and have that appointment brought forward and have those ideas brought forward in a truly independent way. And by way of doing this and having these appointments now done in this way will help to do that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It'll help to raise those ideas without fear of retribution because of who may be in a decision-making role, whether it be in government or whether it be in a position of power in an organization. It has to have that independence, and people have to be able to feel that comfort to raise their voice and to bring their ideas forward. And it's for the betterment of all youth. We've all said, and I've said this many times, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is my goal for my children is to be smarter than me. For them not to have to experience some of the hardships that I've endured and my parents and my grandparents have endured. So that means we've taken and we've helped without being called a formal child advocacy office. Your families are child advocacy offices. Your child are family advocacy organizations, because you know and you want to speak for the betterment of children in your community, children in Manitoba. So let's bring those ideas forward. Let's all share those ideas across all party lines and be able to bring those ideas forward and have in this forum the Child Advocacy Office to be able to say this is the organization that's going to come totally independent of government, totally independent of any party, totally independent of any organization, so they could truly speak their mind and maybe raise the concerns and share the stories that nobody wants to talk about in some situations, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And that's important to be able to maintain that independence. The Auditor General is another organization and another member of the Assembly that the Auditor General Act establishing the Auditor General as an officer of the Manitoba Legislative Assembly to provide the Assembly with independent information, advice, and assurance. And again, there's that word, independence, to be able to bring forward those ideas. And this office examines and reports on how well the government accounts for the resources entrusted to it and how well it manages its operations. And that's an important role, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to be able to say to government, and it's something that's not defined by party lines. It's one thing for a member of our caucus to be able to get up there and criticize government, how they're expending. You know, if we were there, we would do it this way. You're doing it this way, and we'll agree to disagree sometimes on things, but ultimately sometimes we'll just disagree. So to be able to have the Auditor General's independent office to be able to do that and hold the government to account. As a legislative auditor, the Auditor General provides the Legislative Assembly with financial statements, audits, and project audits. The Auditor General examines and audits financial statements included in the province's public accounts, and any other statements the Minister of Finance presents for audits. And again, that criticism and that report that comes out of the Auditor General's office needs to be adhered to and needs to always have that independence. So when we look at Bill 26 and being able to now have these organizations appointed and staffed in a more neutral way and a more independent way, that's a step in the right direction, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Also, the Auditor General can examine the operation of any government organization or the use of public money by any recipient of that money, called project audits. Supported by a staff of more than 55 individuals, the Auditor General serves the Legislative Assembly and in turn all Manitobans. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a staff of 55, in some places it may seem like a lot, in some places it may seem like not enough, but it's imperative that when we're holding the government to account, and especially with government finances, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and the function of government, that this organization is properly staffed and we look at retention and recruitment of individuals to work in this organization. We know many organizations where there's a lot of good people. There's a lot of good people that may come into an organization, but for whatever reason, they may not feel appreciated, whether it be just the environment or whether it be the financial appreciation to be able to say. But it's important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the Auditor General's office and their 55 plus staff, we need to keep that properly resourced. We need to keep that organization properly staffed. And there shouldn't be, if the Auditor General has an opinion that's raised of government, there shouldn't be retribution to the staff. There should be retribution to the office to say, well, you know what, 55 people, that seems like a lot, let's cut that down to 40. Just so we can try and avoid some kind of accountability. And that's not the way the organization should work. The Chief Electoral Officer, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is another role that's very important. We're going to see that today. We're going to see those organizations and the Chief Electoral Officer conduct work today. So that's ongoing work on a regular basis. You know, to some Manitobans that we may think, you know, every 4 years we'll have an election, or in this case, the last case, maybe 3 years, and we have an election. And that's the only time we talk about electoral officer, you know, a little window before elections, whether it be 6 weeks, 2 months before elections. and that's the only time you see the electoral officer, or you hear about the word electoral officer. But that job is imperative year-round, every day, to be able to look forward to what's going to happen. We debated bills here just the other day about vote counting and being able to improve that system. So in that system, the chief electoral officer also plays a key role in that system, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to be able to make things more efficient. So Bill 26 can hopefully go ways to be able to improve the efficiency of that office, to improve the independence of that office, because truly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in provincial election time, it should be nothing but independence. There shouldn't be any side dictating how the election is run. There shouldn't be any side having influence on how the election is run, or strongly hinting or strongly recommending how the electoral process works. It should be truly independent, and by appointing the chief electoral officer in a manner that's not just perception of independence, but actual independence, is imperative. And it's imperative so that Manitobans have that trust in that system to be able to say, that's a truly independent process that's going there. They're not influenced by the PCs, by the NDP, by the Liberal Party. They're not influenced by anybody. It's truly an independent organization, and the chief electoral officer is a paramount and a key role in the independence and the truly nonpartisanship of that organization. And of course, it reports ultimately to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba, and the CEO is imperative that they're nonpartisan. And of course, they don't get to vote in an election, albeit you may think, my one vote doesn't matter. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's time and time again. And I think that's a common theme between our party and I'm sure the PC party also. Get out to vote. It's imperative that Manitobans get out to vote, and that's something that we strongly encourage. We strongly encourage all Manitobans to get out and vote. Whether or not they vote for an individual or a group, or if they may not vote for you if you're knocking on their door, it's imperative that they vote and that they participate in the democratic process, because we can't take that for granted. But again, if you're going to ask somebody, no matter how you vote, as long as you vote, I want to ensure you, though, that process is done fairly, is done equitably, and it's done in a nonpartisan and independent way. And having the chief electoral officer be the one to say, I'm truly independent, I'm truly nonpartisan, that then puts faith in that Manitoban to be able to say, yes, I believe in that process, yes, I can get out there and do that. So again, and maybe I'm actually speaking to a role that the chief electoral officer may take, promoting those voting opportunities to all voters, educating voters about the electoral process. Like I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's a job that doesn't just happen 6 weeks before election. It doesn't just happen 2 months before an election. That's something that's imperative all year round. 365 days a year. I don't want to say 24/7 because obviously the chief electoral officer needs to have some time off too, but it's a lifestyle that they promote the electoral process. So it's very important to maintain that independence. So they also work with parties. They work with the NDP. They work with the Conservative Party. They work with the Liberal Party to be able to say, we're going to do this in a proper way. So that chief electoral officer has that independence. And sometimes that's difficult, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If an organization or a person in a role such as this may not want to be able to say, hey, I have to criticize you can't do this. You're not able to do this. Sometimes that's a difficult thing, for a little bit of intimidation factor, and maybe that person may not feel that they can actually do that. But by organizing this structure and having a chief electoral officer appointed independently via this bill, that enables that to happen. And I'm sure there's been a number of times where members opposite members on this side have had conversation with a chief electoral officer or the electoral officer in your riding or a polling station, to be able to have that open communication, to be able to say, I'm not here so you can tell me what I want to hear. I'm here because I want you to tell me exactly how the system's supposed to work. And if they truly feel there's no fear of retribution and they have that independence, then they can actually say what they want to say. And that's an important part of the democratic process, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've heard a few speakers now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, speak about the clerk of the Assembly. And the clerk of the Legislative Assembly is a senior permanent employee of the Legislature. They're responsible to the Legislative Assembly through the Speaker for maintaining records of the Assembly and for the custody of the legislative documents like the order paper, votes and proceedings, debates, proceedings, Hansard, for example. The clerk also serves as manager of the non-political staff of the Legislature, based here in the Legislative Building. The clerk provides advice and assistance relating to the parliamentary procedure to the Speaker, the Deputy Chairperson, committee chairpersons, and to all MLAs, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They answer questions, they provide clarification respecting the rules of the House, and sometimes that's a difficult conversation to have. I'm sure members on all sides of this chamber have had their that look from the clerk to say, hey, you're not supposed to do that. They may not, they may do that through the Speaker, but they'll, I can tell sometimes when we made comments and we've been perhaps out of line or out of order, the clerk's head has popped up and then the Speaker turns around and there we go, you know, order is kind of how that went. And I have absolute respect for the clerk of the Assembly to be able to hold all of us to account, because that's important too. And I have great respect for the work they do there. And I know I personally would never be able to do that work, because it's just something that's so difficult to be able to do. There's so many moving parts throughout the day to be able to say that, you know what, and I truly don't understand how the clerks and the desks of the clerks can stay so calm through some of these, maybe they'll call them shenanigans, whatever they want to refer to that sometimes, but at the same time, it's with great respect that the clerk's office conducts their business to all members here in the chamber, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And that's something that takes great skill. That's something that takes, I have great admiration for that position. But again, that's based on the independence. The clerk's office and the clerk here in the Assembly has to be able to have that freedom to say, hey, I'm going to call you to order no matter who you are, no matter which constituency you represent, whether you're a minister or you're an opposition MLA or a backbench MLA or an independent MLA, to be able to say that, you know what, I have to call you to order on this thing. What you did was either not right or I just want to correct it. And there's always constructive criticism and there's always comments after, and they're very approachable. The clerks here are very approachable to be able to say, you know, I have a question, I have a comment, especially when we've had it. I'm sure members opposite, some were elected for the first time in 2016, some of us were elected for the first time in 2019, coming into this place and having a lot of questions. And you can rely on your colleagues for some answers, but you can also rely on the clerks for those answers. So that takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of dedication. So every time, and if you see any clerks in the hallway, please, always good morning, good afternoon, good evening, have a great day. Because you know what, they've earned that. They've earned that right to be able to have that feeling of accomplishment, that feeling of appreciation for what they do. And sometimes it gets very difficult. The clerk also directs the activities of the office of the clerk, the deputy clerk, office manager, secretary, and other offices of the Assembly, including the committees, Hansard, journal branches, members' allowance offices, the visitor service program for the Legislative Assembly. The clerk is also the secretary to the Legislative Assembly Management Commission, the program administrator for the Legislative Assembly internship program, and is the secretary for all the Manitoba branch of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. Now that's a pretty good job resume if you want to ever put that out there and you want to say, this is my duties. As an MLA, you list certain duties, and those of us that are professionals before we got here in whatever organizations or whatever groups you came, if you start doing your kind of duties and your experiences, for the clerk to be able to list those things as experiences, that's incredible, to be able to do that kind of work. In addition, it is responsibility for recording and maintaining the official documents of the Assembly and its committees, and for administrative service for the MLAs. And again, that just goes down in history, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So that office of the Clerk of the Assembly is imperative to be able to have those correct, have those right. Many of us have gone back and looked at either your own comments in Hansard or debates in Hansard to be able to say that. And there's a lot of what you would see as kind of behind the scenes work that you really don't see in there. But really, if you wanted to go through a lot of the records of Manitoba legislators throughout the years and the decades, there's a lot of unseen work in there that's due to the clerks and being able to keep that independence. And of course, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And I think most would agree that a lot of us, and I would say all of us, are very decent to be able to to deal with, and I could say his name, Mr. Jeffrey Schnorr, correct? I could say Mr. Jeffrey Schnorr's name. So my first conversation with Jeffrey Schnorr when I first got elected was very pleasant. And he made it very clear, very pleasant, but also very professional about maintaining the independence, maintaining the, you know what, and it was a conversation of, I mean, I'm not going to get into the details of my specific conversation with him, but it was very pleasant. And I don't have $31 million, but I won't go there.
Order.
But to be able to have that conversation, and there's a true sense of that independence, and the conflict of interest commissioner is very important to the function of government, to the function of Manitoba. To be able to say that whether you're government, whether you're opposition MLAs, but more importantly, when you're government, that you're making decisions that are based in the best interest of Manitobans.
Order. When this matter is again before the House, the honourable member for Kiiwetinoong will have 5 minutes remaining. The hour being 5 p.m. This House is adjourned and stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30 p.m.